Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. A few months ago, I went camping in New Mexico with my friend David, who has family there. If you're someone who enjoys the rugged beauty of desert landscapes, the Sandia Mountains, just northeast of Albuquerque, are truly breathtaking. We spent much of our first day hiking through the Sibley National Forest, heading towards the mountain range. We still had a long way to go before reaching the foot of the mountains, and with daylight running out, we decided to set up camp for the night. The trail was mostly rocky, but we managed to find a spot that was a little softer, a small clearing where we could settle down. We didn't bring a tent, just sleeping bags, since we knew it'd be a dry climate. Our camp was simple, a small fire pit for cooking and 2 sleeping bags laid out next to it. We planned to rest early, waking up before dawn to get back on the trail before the heat of the day hit. A few hours later, I woke up to hear David's voice calling my name from somewhere off to the side. "Hey, over here. Come take a look at this." His voice was coming from the woods near the edge of the clearing. I glanced around our camp and saw that David's sleeping bag was empty. My sleep-fod brain registered this and I called out to him, "What did you find?" He repeated himself, "Over here, come take a look at this." I wasn't fully awake, so I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I should have noticed how odd his voice sounded. It wasn't just David's usual voice. It seemed like there were 2 voices layered on top of each other. One was clearly his, but the other was deeper, distorted, and almost mechanical. Groggily, I stumbled out of my sleeping bag, slipped on my boots, and made my way toward the voice. By the time I was almost at the tree line, it called out to me again, "Over here, come take a look at this." The voice was flat, repeating the same words, with no change in tone. Just as I was about to shout back that I was coming, something grabbed my wrist from behind. A second hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my startled gasp. I spun around, and there was David, standing behind me, his eyes wide with fear. He pressed a finger to his lips and motioned for me to follow him, his movements quick and urgent. Confused, but trusting his expression, I silently gathered my things and followed him back towards our campsite. When we got there, he pointed at my sleeping bag and pack, then started rolling up his own sleeping bag tightly. His body language was clear. We needed to leave. "What's going on, man?" I whispered, still trying to piece things together. David's face stayed tense, and he shushed me again, then pointed at my sleeping bag and made a rolling gesture. He was silently telling me we needed to leave and find a new spot to sleep. Right now. I wasn't sure what had spooked him, but I could see it was serious, so I packed up and followed him into the woods, retracing our steps from earlier that day. We didn't stop until we were well away from the trees, back out in the open. After about an hour of walking, David finally spoke. "The voice you heard," he said quietly, "was probably a skinwalker, trying to lure you out into the forest." I didn't buy it. I've heard stories about skinwalkers, but I thought David was just messing with me. He was a prankster, and I was sure he was playing one of his usual tricks on me. But just as I was about to call them out on it, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My own voice, clear as day, repeating what I had just asked David. "What's going on, man?" I turned around quickly, and my heart skipped a beat. About 20 yards away, glowing eyes stared back at me from the shadows of the trees. David immediately broke into a run, and I followed him, panic rising in my chest. We didn't stop running until we reached the truck, parked near the entrance of the national park. We jumped in, and David slammed the engine to life, peeling out of there with the tires screeching on the asphalt. The drive back was silent, except for the hum of the engine, but I could see David glancing nervously in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Then I saw it. Something massive, black, and shadowy lumbered into the headlights, moving across the road ahead of us. "Holy crap, is that a bear?" I asked, but it was too big, far too large to be any bear I knew. David shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. He kept looking into the mirror, his face going pale. I saw him glance through the back window, and then he swerved hard, nearly sending us into a ditch. I grabbed the wheel and yanked it back into place. "What the hell, man?" I managed to get out, my knuckles white from gripping the wheel. "It's chasing us," he said, his voice flat. I didn't want to look back, but I had to. Some part of me still didn't want to believe what was happening. Once I was sure David was focused on the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror on my side. There it was, two glowing yellow eyes, right behind us. The shape was massive, and it was closing the distance. It rose from all fours to standing, like something out of a nightmare, and threw its head back, letting out a sound that was like a mixture of a siren and the buzzing of thousands of insects. Then, the radio crackled to life, and the same strange, distorted noise blasted out of the speakers. The sound seemed to last forever, but in reality, it was only a few seconds before it was over. The night fell silent again, except for the roar of the engine. We didn't speak again until we reached David's family's place in Albuquerque, but neither of us ever mentioned that night again. Even now, as I write this, it feels like a horrible dream. It was vacation time, and I decided to visit my friend Sushil, who had moved from Mumbai to Pune for his engineering studies. He lived in a rented bungalow in Nigdi with his college friends. The house was beautiful but isolated, far from the main city. Sushil loved the privacy it offered. Since all his roommates had gone home for the holidays, he was the only one left there. We planned to spend a couple of days together before heading back to Mumbai. Another friend, Vikrant, studying in Bangalore, was also going to join us. I arrived at Sushil's place late in the afternoon. The trip from Pune station to his house took as long as my train ride from Mumbai, because I missed a turn and couldn't find anyone around to ask for directions. Sushil found this hilarious when I finally arrived. After settling in, he gave me a tour of the house. A spacious bungalow with 3 bedrooms on the ground floor and a large, breezy terrace upstairs. We decided to sleep on the terrace under the open sky, thinking it would be fun. One thing I noticed was that there wasn't another house in sight for at least a kilometer. The area was eerily quiet and isolated. Vikrant's train was due to arrive at 1 a.m., so Sushil planned to leave around 11:45 p.m. to pick him up on his motorcycle. After dinner, I made myself comfortable on the sofa in the living room and soon fell asleep. Sushil left as planned. I woke up abruptly around 12:15 a.m. The entire house was pitch dark. It took me a moment to realize that it was one of Pune's frequent power cuts. I tried to calm myself, reassuring myself that the power would return soon. As I lay there, waiting for Sushil and Vikrant to return, I became aware of a low humming sound coming from outside the window near me. The sound unnerved me, but curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly moved toward the window to check. I opened the window slightly, and the humming sound grew louder. Suddenly, something hit the window pane with great force, barely missing my head. I was stunned but managed to crawl back to the shattered window and look outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. A thin man with matted hair and a beard stood about 15 meters from the house. His body was smeared with ash, and he wore only a loincloth. He held a sling in his right hand, spinning it to create the eerie humming sound, all while grinning at me with an unsettling expression. Before I could react, he picked up another stone, loaded it into the sling, and hurled it. This time it missed me, but smashed another window pane. My heart raced as I realized this was no ordinary situation. I crawled to the farthest corner of the room, hoping desperately for my friends to return. After a brief silence, there was a loud thump on the door. For a moment, I thought Sushil and Vikrant might have returned, but I remembered that Sushil had locked the door from the outside to avoid waking me. Paralyzed with fear, I stayed put, unsure of what to do as the thumps grew louder. The humming sound of the sling resumed, and I was convinced it was only a matter of time before the man broke in. In a panic, I decided to escape to the terrace, locking the door behind me. As I stood on the terrace, praying for my friends to return, I suddenly heard a noise behind me. Turning around, I froze in horror. The same man was sitting on the edge of the terrace wall, cross-legged and grinning as though enjoying my fear. It was impossible for him to have climbed up so quickly, especially without making any noise. I realized I had no choice but to confront him. Grabbing a small iron rod lying nearby, I muttered, "Om Namah Shivaya," and charged toward him. When I was about 10 feet away, I threw the rod at him. He dodged it but lost his balance and fell backward off the terrace. Relieved, I approached the edge, expecting to see his body on the ground below, but to my shock, there was no one there. The area was completely empty, with no sign of the man who had terrorized me. Overwhelmed, I slumped to the ground and blacked out. When I regained consciousness, I found myself back in the living room. Sushil and Vikrant were standing over me, looking concerned. They explained that they had found me unconscious on the terrace when they returned. After I told them everything that had happened, Sushil admitted it was a mistake to leave me alone. He revealed that he and his friends had seen the same man about a month earlier. When they went outside with sticks to confront him, they found no one there. Later, villagers told them about a man suspected of ritual sacrifices, cannibalism, and necrophilia, who had been lynched by a mob. The man was believed to be an Adkori, a member of a secretive sect known for extreme practices. Adkoris are a Hindu sect that lives in cremation grounds and engages in bizarre rituals, including consuming corpses, living in isolation, and performing ceremonies that mainstream Hinduism shuns. They smear ash on their bodies and believe their practices bring them closer to God. Encounters with Adkoris are rare and their lives remain shrouded in mystery. The next morning, we left the house and returned to Mumbai. Sushil and his friends never stayed there again, moving instead to a flat in the heart of Pune. That house remains a haunting memory, one I'll never forget. I live in a small town in central Alabama. On nearly all sides, it's surrounded by forest. Growing up, the woods never scared me. Most kids would play in there, get their hands on BB guns, and pretend to have war games. A few of us would build forts, climb trees, and enjoy the quiet of the woods. Nothing about it ever felt wrong. That was, until someone went missing. I was in 9th grade when it happened. The boy who went missing was in 6th grade. Our town is small, about 1,200 people, so the police didn't have many leads. The search went on for days, but after the 5th day, it was called off. The boy was declared missing. It was a tragedy that shook the whole town. For the next few years, parents didn't let their kids play in the forest anymore. Every year, there'd be a ceremony to remember the boy. All the schools would let out early that day. But then, more people started to go missing during hunting trips. I was the only one who made it back. It was the end of my senior year, and to celebrate, my dad decided to take me on a hunting trip. I wasn't a big fan of hunting like he was, but I figured I'd go. I didn't spend much time with him anymore, so it seemed like a good chance to reconnect. He brought 2 of his friends along, Randy, who was about 5'10" with messy brown hair, and Hector, who was a little taller, chubby, and had balding blonde hair. I didn't really know them that well, so it felt awkward at first. My dad said we'd be out in the woods for a long time, probably all day. We left early in the morning and were expected to return late that night. He told me to pack whatever drinks and snacks I wanted. I brought just water to stay hydrated and a few snacks, chips, and Little Debbie cakes. My dad gave me a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle, and though I wasn't an expert, I knew how to handle it. Hector woke me up at about 4 a.m. to say they were ready. I got up, put on my clothes, grabbed my iced coffee from the fridge, and saw my dad and his friends outside, smoking and laughing. It felt normal, just like old times. When I got my stuff together, I stepped outside, carrying my bag and rifle. "You ready to go, buddy?" my dad asked, tossing his cigarette onto the walkway and grinding it out with his shoe. "Sure am. Got everything I need." I was excited, even if I wasn't sure about hunting. I just wanted to see what my dad got up to with his friends. We piled into the truck, Randy and Hector in the bed, and I sat up front with my dad. The sky was still dark, just beginning to hint at dawn. As we drove, Hector and Randy bounced around in the back because the roads weren't great. My dad asked how I was feeling about the trip. "I'm pretty excited. Glad you brought them along," I said, trying to break the silence. "Yeah, I figured it would be more fun with the guys. You haven't really talked to them much, so this is good." The drive was only about 10 minutes, and we passed the time chatting about life. Randy and Hector, on the other hand, were arguing about who missed shots more. It got heated, and my dad slammed on the brakes, sending them tumbling into the cab. We all laughed, though Randy and Hector didn't seem as amused. When we arrived, another truck was already there, covered in a thin layer of dirt, just like everything around here. We grabbed our things and headed down the trail. My dad pointed out some good spots to start hunting, and we made our way about half a mile down the path. Hector immediately pulled out a drink from his bag and tossed one to me and to Randy. I instinctively caught it, but then I hesitated and tried to hand it back. "I don't really drink, but thanks," I said. He shrugged, took it back, and Randy, of course, accepted the offer and began drinking. My dad motioned for me to come over, pointing toward a hill in the distance. It was hard to see anything clearly with the weak morning light, but I could make out the shape of a deer. "First one of the day," my dad said, trying to show off. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, Randy slapped him on the back of the head. My dad missed the deer entirely, and it bolted off. Randy cackled, claiming it was payback for earlier. I couldn't help but laugh too. We waited a bit longer, but eventually moved on. We reached another spot, and that's when I thought I saw someone standing off in the woods, away from any trails. I pointed it out to my dad, but he just shrugged. "Idiot's gonna get himself shot. No one should be off the trail like that." The figure was tall, but I didn't think much of it. As everyone set up, the person disappeared into a thicker area of trees. The rest of the morning was peaceful. I managed to hit a deer, and everyone seemed happy with that. But I wasn't really that into hunting, so it didn't excite me as much as it should have. The strange figure was still in my mind, though. I caught glimpses of someone moving between the trees now and then, but I couldn't get a good look. It didn't seem threatening, but something felt off. By the evening, we'd walked about 6 or 7 miles into the woods. I was getting tired, but I kept going, enjoying the company. We set up in a new spot, and that's when we started to smell something awful. Decaying, rotten. Hector said he'd go find the source and try to move it. He never came back. After half an hour, we started to get worried. The smell lingered, and Hector still hadn't returned. We called his name, but there was no answer. We ventured off the trail, searching for him, but soon we were lost. We couldn't remember which way we'd come from. An argument broke out, but I told them to stop. We needed to focus. My dad then suggested we listen for any sounds, footsteps, anything. We all went quiet. But then I realized something. There was no sound. No birds. No rustling leaves. Just silence. I looked up at the sky. It was clear, no storm coming. Then we heard something. A distant sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable. They were coming from deeper in the forest. It was getting darker, and Randy pulled out his flashlight. We moved toward the sound, sticking together to make sure no one got lost. I bumped into something wet. I thought it was tree sap, but when I turned around, I heard Randy scream. My heart sank. What I saw made me freeze in terror. It was Hector's skin, strung up between 2 trees. I threw up instantly, overwhelmed by the sight. Without thinking, my dad told us to get out of the forest, now. He led us, moving fast as we navigated through the trees. Branches scraped at me as we ran. But then I heard it, Randy's scream. I turned around. Something huge, nearly 8 feet tall, had grabbed him and was carrying him away. My dad didn't hesitate. He pulled out his rifle and fired. The sound of that thing's scream still haunts me. It was like a mix of different animals crying out in pain. When it turned around, I saw it clearly for the first time. One eye. That was all it had in place of a face. Its body was huge, its arms too long for its frame, and its skin was oily and gray. It rushed toward my dad, and before I knew it, it had grabbed him too. I stood frozen, clutching the flashlight, trying not to make a sound. When the creature dropped Randy, I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, too afraid to move. The thing picked him up again and carried him deeper into the forest. Time felt like it stopped. After what felt like forever, I slowly moved over to my dad and grabbed the truck keys from his pocket. I had to get out. I had to survive. There was something unsettling about that night. I had no idea what it was, but I knew I needed to leave. Following the directions he had given me, I walked carefully through the forest, my heart beating faster with each step. The path was quiet, too quiet. But then, just as he said, I came out of the trees and found myself just a few feet away from my dad's truck. I rushed to it, fumbling with the keys in my shaking hands until I finally unlocked the door. I didn't look back. I didn't care that the town was still behind me. A couple of towns over, the police caught up with me. I was the main suspect after all. But when they discovered the bodies, well, let's just say, they couldn't believe what they were looking at. No human could have done something like that. That's when I left Alabama behind. Now, I live in Illinois, far from the memories of that place. To this day, I still wonder if whatever that thing was is still out there, waiting for another hunter to lose their way in the woods. I pray it's not. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When my gran passed away, the feelings of her presence around me became stronger. I could sense her beside me, a comforting hand on my shoulder, or a sudden rush of cold air sweeping over me. It wasn't scary. It felt good, protective. I knew she was there. One night, though, something unexpected happened. I was sent to bed early. I can't remember why. My mom was at work and my dad was looking after us. I hated my dad. He abused us for many years. I was crying my eyes out when I noticed a figure in the corner of my room. Opposite my bed, there was a lady sitting on a rocking chair. She wasn't threatening. She was just sitting there, rocking, watching me. I shut my eyes tightly, hoping it was my imagination, and when I opened them, she was gone. A couple of years later, my mom finally left my dad. While we were packing up our things, I came across some old family photos. One of the photos stunned me. It showed a lady sitting on a rocking chair outside an old Irish cottage. It was the same lady I saw that night in my room. I asked my mom who she was. The photo, nearly 80 to 90 years old, was of my mom's great-grandmother. However, my mom wasn't sure which side of the family she came from. When I told her I'd seen the woman when I was younger, she believed me right away. She explained that she too had been haunted by this woman on multiple occasions. In fact, the photo had been given to her by a family member to verify who the woman was. Years later, another strange event happened just before I was due to dance at the World Championships in Belfast in 2001. My mom and sister were upstairs in the main bedroom, and I was downstairs with my brother. Suddenly, my stereo turned on by itself, blasting music at full volume. I ran upstairs to switch it off, but we were all in shock. How could it have turned on, increased its volume, and started playing the 21st track, Reach for the Stars by S Club 7? My mom convinced me it was a message from the other side, someone encouraging me to reach for the stars, try my hardest, and believe in myself. Other experiences happened during that time, but as life got busier and I dealt with teenage emotions, I forgot about them. It wasn't until recently, when I got my life back on track, that I started noticing these things again. Now it seems I'm even more in tune with these events than before. Over the past 6 months, I've had several unsettling premonitions. For instance, the night before my husband's uncle passed away, I felt something bad was going to happen. I couldn't pinpoint what, but I told my husband. 6 hours later, his uncle died unexpectedly. Another time, I suddenly felt overwhelmed with emotion. I became hysterical, convinced my mom was trying to harm herself. I live in Turkey, and she's in the UK, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Days later, my mom called and reassured me she was fine. However, a month later when she visited, she admitted that she had tried to end her life around the same time I'd felt it. She'd taken pills and vodka, but survived. One night, while out in town, I blurted out that I felt an earthquake was coming. My friends laughed it off, but the next day, news broke of a massive 7.8 earthquake in Japan. On another occasion, I suddenly felt a deep sense of dread. The next day, I learned that 20 soldiers had died in an accident. When my mom came to stay with me 2 months ago, she told me she felt a presence in my home. One night, she became hysterical, claiming that there was a woman standing over me all the time. I got angry and asked her to leave. I couldn't handle hearing it anymore. I recently visited my hometown and caught up with some close friends. One of them, Amit, had recently gotten married. We'll call him Amit and his wife, Reena. While chatting and recalling old memories, I asked them about the wedding and how it all went. That's when they shared a spine-chilling incident that happened during their wedding. They had rented a large mansion for the wedding celebrations. Reena's family stayed at the mansion since they had come from another town, while Amit's family stayed in their own home nearby. Amit's hometown is a small, remote place, a couple of 100 miles from the main city. One night during the wedding, Reena's father and her 2 brothers were sleeping in a room in the mansion. The lights were off and the door was shut, but not locked. Anyone could easily push or pull the door to go in or out. Around midnight, Reena's father suddenly began screaming at the top of his lungs. His screams were so loud that the security guard, stationed far away at the mansion's gate, heard them and ran toward the room to help. Reena's brothers, who were sleeping in the same room, woke up in shock, completely confused about what was happening. Reena's father was fully awake and appeared to be fighting someone or something with all his strength. He was thrashing his arms and legs as though a heavy figure had pinned him down and was trying to strangle him. While he could clearly see the attacker's face, neither of Reena's brothers could see anything. They could only see their father fighting against something invisible. The lights wouldn't switch on and the door wouldn't open. Reena's brothers tried to help their father, but didn't know how to fight something they couldn't see. Meanwhile, his terrifying screams continued. By this time, other family members in nearby rooms had woken up and gathered outside the door along with the security guard. Despite their efforts, they couldn't open the door and panic spread as everyone heard the horrifying screams from inside. Finally, one of Reena's brothers turned on his mobile phone flashlight, and as soon as the light illuminated the room, the unseen pressure on Reena's father disappeared. He gradually calmed down, the room lights came back on, and the door finally opened without any trouble. Reena's father was drenched in sweat and completely shaken. When they asked him what had happened, he couldn't speak. Meanwhile, the security guard looked furious and demanded to know why they had slept in that particular room. Reena's brother explained that the receptionist had given them the keys. The guard was visibly upset and said, "How could such a mistake happen? Everyone in this town knows that this room should always remain locked and never be used." Shocked, the family asked why. The guard explained that many years ago, a man had died in that room under mysterious circumstances. While it was officially declared a suicide, rumors of foul play persisted. 2 rival businessmen had a history of conflict, and some believed one had killed the other. After the incident, the mansion was used for weddings, but strange occurrences in that room led to it being permanently locked. At this point in the story, I thought Reena was done, but there was more. After the wedding, her family returned to their hometown, about 500 miles away. Her father began seeing the same ghost there in their house. It seemed the ghost had followed him. The family performed prayers and rituals to banish the spirit, but Reena's father was deeply affected. He couldn't sleep for 3 months, constantly disturbed by the memory of the attack and the ghost's appearance in their home. It took a long time for him to recover. I asked Reena how her father was doing now, as it had been over a year and a half since the incident. She said he was fine and that the ghost hadn't appeared again. After her father began recovering, he finally explained what had happened that night. He was asleep when the ghost suddenly attacked him, pinning him down and trying to remove his Hanuman locket. In Hinduism, Hanuman is a powerful deity whose name is believed to repel spirits. Her father said the ghost kept shouting at him to take off the locket, but couldn't touch it directly. Interestingly, no one else in the room could hear the ghost's voice. When asked what the ghost looked like, Reena's father didn't provide many details. He seemed too traumatized to recall the face, but confirmed it was a man. The attack had a lasting impact on him. He lost half his body weight in just a few months due to stress and fear. Thankfully, he has since recovered and is healthy now. Last year, 3 of my school friends and I went to a small farmhouse owned by my grandfather's friend near a town called Payrol. The house was fairly new, nothing creepy about it at all. The day after we arrived, we decided to help the old man on his farm. During lunch, he told us an old story about wars between European settlers and the native Maori tribes that had taken place on the very land his house stood on. The story wasn't particularly interesting at first, but then he mentioned how many people had died there. What caught our attention, though, was when he said he'd often see a little kid running around his crops at night, vandalizing them with a stick. The kid didn't seem afraid of anything, not even the 3 large farm dogs barking at him. The old man thought the child might have a mental disorder because of how unfazed he was. One time, the kid was standing just a few meters from the front gate, close to one of the dogs that was tied up. The man watched from his window as the child stared into the dog's eyes, completely unaffected by its barking. After a while, the old man decided to step outside and chase the kid away. But as soon as he opened the door and looked toward the gate, the kid was gone. The dog, however, was still barking as if the kid were right there. The old man was baffled. The next day, we decided to explore the farm to see if we could find anything unusual. That night, around 8:30 p.m., one of my friends and I were sitting on the front porch while the other 2 were asleep inside. The old man was at the dining table, sipping whiskey. We were bored and started playing on our laptops when I suddenly heard footsteps on the roof. The sound of bending tin sheets was unmistakable. We froze. Everyone else was either inside or asleep. Before I could fully process what was happening, there was a loud thud on the ground, like something heavy had fallen and broken. Alarmed, we turned around and saw him. There, on the ground, was the same kid the old man had described. He looked like an ordinary child, wearing dark-colored dungarees and a white shirt. It was hard to see clearly in the dark, but he didn't look hurt. Ignoring my friend's attempts to stop me, I jumped off the porch to check if the boy was okay. But as soon as I turned back to face him, he was standing upright again. Half of his face was covered in blood. We didn't wait to think. We bolted back to the house, slamming the door behind us. From the window, we watched as the kid stood there with an innocent look on his face. Then, in a flash, he sprinted across the backyard at an impossible speed and disappeared into the night. It was over in seconds. Terrified, we couldn't speak. We sat on the couch, drinking water and trying to calm down. But sleep was impossible. We turned on the TV and kept it on all night, doing everything we could to push the horrifying sight out of our minds. At around 3 a.m., the old man woke up, still groggy from his whiskey. He walked over to us and asked, "So, found anything yet?" I managed a faint laugh and said, "You wouldn't believe it." We explained everything we had seen, describing the boy in detail. The old man looked concerned and, for the first time, genuinely uneasy. He told us we should leave the farm the next morning, and we didn't argue. We packed up and left without telling our other 2 friends, who had slept through the entire night. They wouldn't have believed us anyway. It took us days to shake off the fear and get back to normal, but we'll never forget that night. My little brother died about 13 years ago in an accident. He was hit by a drunk driver. Afterward, we lived in our apartment for about 2 years before moving into a 2-story house that had been split into 2 apartments. Initially, we rented just 1 unit. My sister and I shared a room until I became financially stable enough to rent the upstairs apartment, where I now live with my dad and daughter. My mom stays downstairs with my youngest sister. When my sister and I first moved into that house, We shared a bedroom at the back of the apartment. The room always felt cold and damp, and neither of us ever felt comfortable there. I was 17 at the time and had my first experience with sleep paralysis in that room. It felt as though someone would enter the room and I'd see a shadow approach my bedside and pull the blanket off me. I'd be caught between sleep and wakefulness, and it scared me to my core. I never told my sister or parents, and these experiences came and went for years until I moved upstairs. That's when things became truly terrifying. When I got pregnant, my boyfriend of 5 years came to stay with me. After my daughter was born, I found myself scared to fall asleep at night. My daughter would shuffle in her crib constantly, as though something was bothering her. One night, my boyfriend woke up hearing the pages of the Bible on our bedhead, flipping back and forth, even though there was no breeze. When he opened his eyes, he saw the shadow of a man standing on my side of the bed, looking down at me. That same night, I heard the pages of the Bible too, and I drifted in and out of sleep, hearing someone enter the room and whisper to me. I was frozen with fear and couldn't move. These experiences continued for years. Sometimes they'd die down, but they always returned. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and see a shadow near the back door. My boyfriend once got up in the night, walked into the corridor, and saw 2 bare feet walking into the living room. He turned right around and came back to bed. As my daughter grew older, I eventually had my son. My daughter began to tell me that she would wake up and see a man standing by the cupboards in my room. After their father and I separated, amicably for logistical reasons, my daughter and I started sharing a bed. We'd both wake up and see shadows or feel like someone was in the room with us. The attic entrance is in my bedroom, and some nights I'd hear loud thumping noises coming from above. My dad has heard it too, on occasions when we were together. The entire house feels eerie. Shadows move in the corners of your eyes. Things go missing and reappear later, though I sometimes blame this on the kids, and yet sometimes all of it stops for months, as if the house itself is taking a break. The scariest part of all of this is what my mother experienced. After my father moved upstairs with me, they had separated but still cared for us deeply. She started sleeping alone downstairs. She told me she'd often leave her bedroom door open, and late at night, when she turned off her TV, she'd hear something enter her room and stop at the foot of her bed. It would growl like a big dog. This went on for weeks, until she began leaving her TV on all night. Things escalated. One night, she felt someone climb into bed with her. She was half awake but couldn't move, as though her energy was being drained. The entity lay on the bed with her. On other nights, she would wake up in the middle of the night feeling as if she was being cradled in its arms. Strangely, over time she stopped feeling threatened, and even became accustomed to it, as though it was part of her nightly routine. Our family has grown used to the strange noises, shadows, and unexplainable events in this house. It has become part of our everyday lives, disturbing but familiar. It was one of those nights, the kind where you know the shift is going to be a long one, especially when you've got the least seniority. I knew exactly why I was on sentinel duty that evening. It's because no one else wanted to be. My boss, along with a few of the older rangers, would be busy playing poker, and I, with no money to bet or skills to boast, was sent up to the tower. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I walked into the central station at the park entrance. A couple of the rangers were milling around, chatting, and messing with their equipment. The day shift was passing on any relevant details to the night crew. Mostly routine stuff, nothing to worry about. It wasn't a busy season. There were only a handful of campers scattered around the park, and the occasional bear sighting near the outskirts. Then she walked in. She was about 40, maybe a little older, and dressed in leggings and a light jacket, perfect for a hike. She had that kind of polite but serious demeanor you see in people who are used to handling things on their own. Jonesy, our wannabe ladies' man, was quick to notice. He gave her his usual smile, the kind that didn't have much sincerity behind it, and said, "Welcome to the park. How can I help you?" "Hi," she said, a little taken aback by his charm. "I want to report something." Well, maybe report isn't the right word. I just want to make sure you're aware of something I saw on the trails. Jonesy nodded, still grinning. What did you see? She shifted her weight uneasily, clearly hesitant. I think I saw something stalking me. A few of the older rangers stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to her. It was clear that her words had shifted the atmosphere in the room. Jonesy's tone softened. I'm sorry to hear that. We've had a few bear and bobcat sightings recently. It probably gave you a little bit of a scare. No, she said, shaking her head. It wasn't a bear or a bobcat. I think it was a person. A hush fell over the room. What trail? I asked, more curious than concerned. Sandalwood Luke B., she replied. It's not far from some of the campgrounds and cabins, but whoever it was, they didn't look like a camper. She paused, clearly uncomfortable, and I could see her cheeks flush as she realized everyone was listening. What did they look like? Jonesy asked, now serious. They were shadowy, like they were avoiding the sunlight. I saw them in the woods, just off the trail. They were hiding behind a tree, watching me. Jonesy let out a low whistle. Jesus, that's messed up. I'm sorry that happened to you, he added, his tone softening. What did they look like? Anything specific? She was shaking now, her voice getting quieter. They made noises. Not like animal noises, though. It was a kind of chittering sound. And there was a faint yelling, maybe, kind of like cicadas, but not exactly. And then they whistled, but not like someone whistling at me. It was like they were trying to blend in with the sounds of nature. Whistling, you say? One of the older rangers asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It sounded like a wood thrush. I know that sound. My grandpa was an avid bird watcher. He used to teach me how to identify bird calls. Jonesy couldn't help himself. That's impressive. The woman looked at him and then back at the group. I don't want to file a police report or anything, she said quickly. I don't even have much information. I just wanted to let you know in case something else happens. We'll keep an eye out, Jonesy said, handing her a business card. If you change your mind, give me a call. She nodded and slipped the card into her pocket, but then paused by the door. Something else strange happened, she added. I saw it on both sides of the trail. It crossed behind me. I didn't notice at first, but when I looked it was there, like it was circling me. My mouth went dry as she spoke. It felt wrong, like something was off. Before I could say anything, Jonesy turned to me, his face full of disbelief. What do you think she saw? A Wendigo. One of the older rangers joked, but nobody laughed. I had read about Wendigos and skinwalkers in a mythology class. To be honest, I didn't find it all that funny. Jonesy clapped me on the back, as though to lighten the mood. It's probably just her mind playing tricks. If there's someone out there, those guys will find them. They're good at tracking. But as the conversation moved on, I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. The woman's story stuck with me, and when the shift finally came, I made my way up to the observation tower, trying to shake it off. The tower itself was a maze of old carvings, tags, and stickers. Most of it was harmless. Joe plus Jane forever, or something similar. But then I noticed something new. A pair of eyes had been freshly carved into the wood at the base of the tower. My heart skipped a beat. I might have just chalked it up to kids being mischievous, but after everything that had happened, it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the task ahead. From the top of the tower, you could see everything. The way the storm clouds were rolling in, the darkening sky lit only by occasional flashes of lightning. The wind was picking up, causing the tower to creak ever so slightly. You get used to it, but it still makes you jump at first. About an hour passed, and just as I was settling in, my walkie-talkie crackled to life. How's the view? It was Jonesy. Great, I said, trying to sound relaxed. We're about to do a quick pass around the park. Just wanted to let you know. I glanced out the window toward the base of the tower, where I could see Jonesy and a few other rangers preparing to head out. Their headlights cut through the darkness, but only for a few feet in front of them. "You guys need me to scout anything?" I asked. "Nah, we'll be fine. But hey, if you see any Wendigos out there, give us a heads up, yeah?" Jonesy joked. "If I hear any wood thrushes singing again, I'll let you know," I said, trying to laugh it off. They headed off, and I leaned back in my chair, picking up my book again. But then I heard it, a soft creak of a board. At first, I figured it was just the wind pushing the tower. But then doubt started creeping in. What if someone was out there? I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon. There wasn't much, just my walkie-talkie and a flashlight. But if someone was out there, I needed to be prepared. "Jonesy," I said into the walkie, trying to sound calm. "You there?" There was a long pause before he finally responded. "Yeah, Ned forgot his light, so we're heading back, but we're just leaving now." "Why?" "I thought I heard something creak," I said, my voice unsure. "It's breezy tonight. It's probably just the wind, or a Wendigo," Jonesy added with a laugh. "Right," I said, but something didn't feel right. I tried to brush it off, but as I stared at the door to the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was up there with me. No one climbs 10 stories unless they have to, but what if the woman from earlier had seen someone looking for a place to hide? I stood up slowly, walking across the cabin to the door. I had to check. If I didn't, the rest of my shift would be unbearable. I reached for the handle. I counted down from 3 in my head before pushing open the door. There was nothing. In the distance, a flash of light lit up the sky, followed by a deep roll of thunder, but no one was standing there. I let out a sigh and stepped out onto the landing. The breeze was stronger here, sharper. The storm was moving in fast. I could smell the rain before it hit, the earthy scent that always comes right before the first drop. Even though I was sure there was no one outside the cabin, something pushed me to check the stairs. I walked over to the edge and looked down into the dark. Below, the stories seemed to blur with the night, swallowed up by the blackness. I pulled out my flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark, but it wasn't the best. Cops had these powerful flashlights that could blind you from miles away. Ours? Not even close to that level, but at least it was something. I took a step down, reaching the first landing. Nothing seemed out of place, but I shone the light to the next set of stairs anyway. That's when I saw it, a small reflective strip on the stairs. It caught the light and shimmered for a second. A little curious, I walked down to it. I didn't remember seeing it when I came up, and I would have noticed. It looked like a piece of tape from a jacket or a uniform. But how did it get here? Maybe the wind had blown it up from the campsite, but that felt off. I turned to go back into the cabin, but then I froze. Something had been carved into the railing. Another set of eyes. I didn't move. I just stood there, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But nothing made sense. Even when the rain started to hit my face, I couldn't bring myself to move. What was happening? I clicked off my flashlight. I know, I'd said earlier I didn't want to waste my tools, but at that moment, I felt a rush of anger. I didn't care anymore. The rain came down harder, helping me snap out of it a bit. I was about to head back up to the cabin when I heard it. A creak from the floorboards above me. A sharp, thunderous crash sounded close by, but I barely noticed it. My focus was on the soft sounds of the wood beneath me, the pine steps groaning with each small shift. It felt like hours before I heard anything else. I tried to relax. It was probably nothing. My mind had been working overtime, stringing together random things into something scarier than it actually was. That's what I kept telling myself. Then I heard something else, something dragging across the wood above me, like someone was scraping at it. My legs turned to jelly. I wanted to run, but I was terrified of making too much noise. Plus, racing down these wet, slippery steps didn't seem like the best idea. I crept toward the stairs when the sound suddenly stopped. A moment later, I heard footsteps, slow, steady, heading toward the cabin door. Someone was up there. I wasn't sure who they were or what they wanted, but I didn't want to find out. I kept moving down the stairs, careful not to make any noise. My flashlight was off, and I was descending into the dark, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I reached for my walkie-talkie, but then I realized I'd left it behind. Of course, just then, I heard the cabin door swing open, and something crash through the trees. The familiar static of the walkie-talkie crackled through the air. Whoever was in the cabin had thrown it out of the door. My only connection to the outside world gone. I hurried down, rounding the landing on the 6th story. That's when I heard it. A bird call, the sound of a wood thrush, but it didn't belong here, not at this time of night. The thrushes were long gone. This wasn't a bird. It was a person, a signal. One person was above me, one was below, and I was stuck in the middle. I heard the footsteps above me start to move again. Slow, deliberate. Whoever it was, they were coming down, and I had nowhere to hide. For a moment, I thought about jumping, grabbing a branch as I fell, but that was a terrible idea. It would only make things worse. I had to think fast. The rain was coming down harder, and the stairs were getting slick. The only thing I had on my side was the dark. I made a quick decision. Looking back, it was one of the wildest choices I'd ever made. I climbed over the handrail, my hands gripping the wood as my feet searched for the landing below. My toes barely brushed against it. My arms were burning from holding on, but I couldn't let go. I closed my eyes, afraid that even the whites of them would give me away. I heard footsteps coming closer, one step at a time. I held my breath. The person was right there, looking down at the landing, but they didn't see me. Then I heard it, a soft chittering in the darkness, and the bird call. The footsteps stopped. Then slowly they began to go back up. In a flash, I kicked off my boot, sending it tumbling down the stairs. It hit the landing with a heavy crash. The footsteps stopped, and for a second, everything was silent. I kicked off my other boot, and it fell, landing with a second loud thud. It sounded like I was down below. The footsteps rushed down the stairs, and when they rounded the corner, I quickly pulled myself back over the railing. I landed hard, but I didn't care. I sprinted back up the stairs to the top of the cabin. I had no time to think. I just ran. As soon as I reached the door, I swung it open. And there it was, another set of eyes carved into the wood, staring at me. I slammed the door behind me, bracing it with all my weight. The storm raged outside, and I knew I wasn't alone. 2 people, at least. I was sure of it. They were coming, and they weren't going to stop until they got inside. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the night. The thunder shook the cabin. I glanced up and saw yet another set of eyes, this time above the window. But this time, there was a message. You watch us, but who's watching you? My heart pounded. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The hairs on my arms stood up. I wasn't scared anymore. Something else was coming, something much more primal. I dashed across the room and sat down on a small stool, trying to steady myself. The door slammed again, hard, and I screamed, letting out every bit of terror I could. They kept pushing, the door creaking open a little more each time. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold it. My legs were shaking, my socks slipping on the wooden floor. Then I felt it. A deep rumble, a crack in the sky, and then a blinding flash of light. Lightning had struck the tower. I was safe, but the 2 men at the door were not. The blast sent them flying off the side of the tower, their bodies tumbling down the steps. When I opened my eyes, I saw the charred marks on the wood. The smell of smoke was thick in the air. I didn't waste any time. I ran out the door, careful not to get burned, and dashed down the stairs. It took me only a few minutes to reach the bottom, but it felt like a lifetime. As soon as I saw the headlights of the gator, I collapsed, exhausted. Jonesy and the others rushed to me, and I looked up to see Jonesy's face. That's when I broke down. Above us, the tower was burning. The fire was spreading from floor to floor, eating away at everything in its path. Later, I learned that the 2 men had escaped from a nearby jail. They had beaten up a guard, grabbed uniforms, and disappeared into the woods. They'd been on the run for 3 days. The police had kept it quiet, thinking they could track them down without causing panic. I was lucky, but thinking back, they had been watching me, and I was the target. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This isn't a skinwalker story. In those kinds of stories, the skinwalker follows certain rules. If you don't fall for its tricks, if you don't walk into the bushes with your friends who vanish for hours, then you're safe. The skinwalker can peek at you from behind a tree or try to talk to you, but if you leave quickly and stick close to your friends, it can't touch you. So like I said, this isn't a skinwalker story. This happened in late July in a forest in Montana. It was the same forest my dad and I hunted in every year, but that didn't mean much. It was wild and huge, stretching for miles, until it met the back of the Rockies. We had one small section of the forest where my dad and I knew the trails well, and which my dad didn't like to stray far from. He used to joke, saying we'd take a wrong turn and end up in California, 10 years in the future. But that year, I was impatient. I was bored with the usual trails. I was about to go to college that fall, and I wanted to shake off my old, childish ways and start fresh. I was the one who chose the new trails, deeper into the woods. I argued with my dad until he gave in, agreeing to try them out. From the start, it was a disaster. It was a hot summer, and by the time we unloaded the truck and started on the trail, I'd already gone through half my deodorant. About 30 minutes into the hike, I realized something was wrong. The woods were dead silent. Not a single bird was singing. The only sounds were the wind through the trees and our footsteps. I'd never seen the woods so quiet. We didn't see a single animal that day. To be honest, I tried to hide it from my dad, but it was creepy. We camped in a clearing I'd marked on the map. By then, I was ready to call it quits. Between the heat and the silence, I didn't want to be out there anymore. But this trip was my idea, so I wanted my dad to be the one to say we should go back. He didn't, and after a dinner of ham and beans, we spent a sleepless night in the tent, drenched in sweat. It wasn't until around noon the next day that we noticed the smell. We were walking along the trail when out of nowhere, we were hit with a strong stench, like rotting meat. It was so close. At the same time, the silent woods suddenly came alive. Birds started screeching, like alarms. We froze in place, listening. Then through the underbrush, we saw a herd of deer sprinting past, terrified. I had my rifle slung over my shoulder, but there was no way I could have used it in time. My dad spoke first. "We need to turn back," he said, his voice low. "Something's frightening the animals. Could be a bear." I nodded. Bears weren't common around here, but they were possible. I remembered hearing about a huge grizzly that had attacked some hikers on the other side of the state a few years ago. We started back up the trail, but the smell didn't fade. If anything, it got worse. We were both covering our noses, breathing through our shirts. Everything felt off too. The air felt thick and heavy, like something was about to happen. I remembered when I was a kid, lightning struck a tree just 200 feet from me. This felt like that. We were a day and a half's walk from the truck, and as night fell, we knew it was better not to try and find our way in the dark. We set up camp by the trail, no fire. My dad didn't say much, but I could feel the tension in his posture. His head swiveled at every sound. We were eating cold beans from a tin when we heard it. A low groan from somewhere down the path. Both of us instinctively reached for our rifles. The stench came back, thicker than ever, and I could feel it on my skin. Another groan, like a man sighing. I squinted up the trail and I saw it. A shape, low to the ground and large, moving awkwardly on all fours. It looked unnatural. My dad stepped in front of me. When I first heard the floorboard creak outside my door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The person following me up had made a quick decision. He climbed onto the roof of the cabin, trying to stay out of my sight until he was ready to confront me. I didn't hear anything on the roof, probably because the fan was running and the rain was coming down hard outside. I often think about what could have happened if he had caught me by surprise. Maybe he would have jumped down from the roof. At best, I would have been stabbed by a madman. At worst, I might have tumbled 10 stories to the ground below. Either way, it wasn't a pleasant thought to linger on, especially when I was alone in the quiet hours. That night was my last as a ranger. I was scheduled to go back to school in a few weeks, and I needed to clear my head. Everyone understood what had happened, and they even paid me for the week, which was kind of them. I also took a small piece of the Sentinel Tower as a keepsake from the ordeal. Every time I look at that small piece of wood, I don't think about what might have happened to me. Instead, I remember what I did to survive. Someone was watching me that night, but it wasn't just the criminal. It was nature itself. I'm 17 years old, turning 18 this September. My life has been a journey of moving from country to country. I was born in Beirut, and then my family and I moved to Dubai in 1999, Doha in 2002, Manama in 2006, and finally to Istanbul in December 2010. Turkey is where I live now, and while I've experienced many amazing things here, it's also the place where I face some of the scariest moments of my life. When we first moved to Istanbul, I was thrilled. It felt like heaven. The city was lush and green, and it rained often, something I absolutely love. The house my dad bought was breathtaking. It was a 2-story home with a huge garden, a fountain near the entrance, and a gorgeous terrace filled with flower pots my mom had decorated. The weather was mostly pleasant, with frequent rain adding to the charm. I was over the moon. The day we moved in, I couldn't contain my excitement. My room was on the first floor, and I loved it. My bed was positioned near the bathroom wall, flanked by 2 nightstands. There was a beautiful study desk, a walk-in closet, and a spacious, pretty bathroom. Everything seemed perfect. At first, things were normal, nothing unusual, but soon little things started to bother me. At night, I'd feel a poke on the back of my neck while lying in bed, but when I turned to look, no one was there. Shampoo and soap started disappearing from the bathroom. My towel would vanish during showers, and I'd find my clothes scattered on the terrace or in the back garden. It was strange, but I brushed it off, assuming my sister was playing pranks on me. She loved teasing me after all, but things escalated. I'd wake up to find my books missing, test papers gone, pages torn from my notebooks, and worst of all, my diary, filled with personal thoughts, completely vanished. My room's window would open on its own, and the AC would randomly stop working. I felt like something didn't want me in that room. Desperate, I convinced my sister to swap rooms with me, hoping it would solve the problem. It didn't. The disturbances continued. One night, I woke up with a burning sensation on my left leg, but there was nothing there. It made no sense. What finally pushed me to talk to my mom was when I found my missing diary on my sister's shelf, where she kept her perfumes and makeup. When I opened it, my heart sank. Someone else had been writing in it terribly vulgar things about me. I was terrified. I told my parents, and they admitted they had also experienced strange things. My mom's wedding necklace had disappeared, money went missing from my dad's locker, and my mom felt a coarse hand touch her while she slept. When they spoke to my sister, she revealed she'd been losing things too. She often woke up to weird noises or her alarm clock ringing at random times, like 2 or 5 a.m. Realizing this was beyond coincidence, my parents decided to call a Malvi, a religious scholar. He came to our house, walked around, and eventually told us that there were 3 jinns living in the house. He said they believed the house belonged to them and enjoyed scaring us. He warned that they could be harmful if left unchecked. To help us, he blessed the house, gave us holy water to keep on hand, and advised us to clean the house occasionally with fresh seawater to ward off negativity. After the blessing, everything changed. The disturbances stopped and peace returned to our home. Looking back, I'm grateful we took action. I can't imagine what might have happened if we hadn't. Now I feel thankful that we were able to rid ourselves of those entities and move on with our lives. When I was 2, my family moved into our family's summer house. The house is now 65 years old, but back then it had only been used during the summer. My father wasn't doing well, so we decided to live there permanently. My great-grandfather had bought the land for a good price and built the house long ago. He used to tell people that when the foundation was being dug, they found old stones and marbles, hinting that someone had lived there ages ago. There was also an old well in the garden, adding to the feeling of history. It was a beautiful house with the biggest garden in the neighborhood. But the moment you stepped into the garden, you could feel something strange if you were sensitive to it. When I was around 4, I began to hear someone calling my name. I'd wander into the garden searching for the voice. My mom told me that when I was 3, I used to write strange letters on the walls with chalk, letters that looked like Greek. Another time during winter, we had a stove to heat the room, and sometimes it would smoke. One night, my mom woke up to the sound of loud banging on the walls and tables. She quickly realized we were in danger of carbon monoxide poisoning. That noise may have saved our lives. These strange events happened during the first few years we lived there. When I was 14, I experienced something I'll never forget. One night, I was reading in the living room, and my brother had fallen asleep on the couch. It was around 2 a.m. when I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I heard a whisper telling me to go to bed, but I ignored it. Moments later, a strong wind blew through the windows, making the curtains fly wildly. The night wasn't windy, and it felt unnatural. I panicked and ran to bed. Just a few hours later, my brother woke up screaming. He kept saying, "There's someone in the house." He told us he saw a woman pacing in the room. At first, he thought it was my sister, but then he realized this woman had long, straight hair, while my sister had short, curly hair. A year later, my parents had their own encounter. They were in the living room when they heard someone knocking on the door. Both of them clearly heard my sister's voice saying, "Mom, open the door. It's me." My mom opened the door, but no one was there. When my sister returned home later, she confirmed she had been out with friends. After these incidents, I had a dream about a woman. She was wearing a light pink dress and floating in the garden. She smiled at me and asked if I wanted to see where the treasure was. I said yes, and suddenly I was seeing the garden as it must have looked long ago. There were no trees we had planted, but there was an old mill. She led me to a spot and asked me to dig. When I woke up, I described the woman to my brother, and he said she looked exactly like the figure he had seen that night. Over the years, visitors to the house also experienced strange things. They reported seeing shadows pass by the windows. Objects would go missing only to reappear in the strangest places. Once, I placed my passenger card on a table, and my mom saw me do it. Moments later, it vanished. After searching everywhere, we found it lying on the floor in front of the door, a spot I would have noticed. Knocking on the windows was common too. Late at night, we'd hear the distinct tapping sound of someone at the glass. People might dismiss it as the wind, but I know what I heard. We lived in that house for 22 years before finally selling it. The process took a long time because it was tied up in inheritance from my great-grandfather. One of the most chilling moments came when I brought a friend over who was deeply interested in the paranormal. I told him we had seen a ghost in the garden, but gave no details. After meditating, he described the same woman we had all seen. He said her name was Rachel, and she had once been a volunteer at a church. She had been exiled from Croatia and settled here. Rachel loved children and helped orphans, but she couldn't save a sick little girl. Heartbroken, she buried the girl near the mill. Shortly after, Rachel died of sadness. My friend said she kept repeating a phrase in Croatian, "Mo andio," which translates to "my angel." Even now, I get goosebumps thinking about it. Some might think I'm making this up, but these events truly happened. When we moved to our new house, we made sure it was free of any spirits. I'll never forget Rachel or the strange, haunting presence of that house. This story is about a childhood friend of mine, Susan, whom I'm no longer in touch with. I first met Susan and her cousin when we were 13 years old. They used to come over to my house with a group of other girls, and we'd do all sorts of silly things, making prank calls, taking endless pictures, and just being carefree teenagers. Back then, Susan was a completely normal, lively girl. Years passed, and life took us in different directions. I went to university and lost touch with most of my childhood friends. One holiday, when I was back in my hometown, I ran into Susan's cousin at a hairdresser. She told me that Susan hadn't been well lately. She mentioned Susan had been fainting and experiencing strange attacks. I assumed it was a health issue and suggested she needed medical help. Her cousin explained that Susan had already seen doctors and psychologists, yet her condition wasn't improving. She also mentioned something chilling. During these attacks, Susan's voice would grow thick and unsettling, and she started predicting things that would happen. Susan had always been fascinated by psychic abilities. As teenagers, she would try to summon spirits or communicate with them. Her cousin told me that one of those attempts went wrong, and Susan believed she was now haunted. What struck me was that her cousin, someone deeply skeptical of anything paranormal, seemed to believe it too. Her cousin shared some unsettling stories. She told me about a gathering at her house that Susan wasn't invited to. Yet, out of the blue, Susan called and said she knew there was a party and that she was coming over. On another occasion, Susan and her cousin visited a friend, and as Susan walked through the bedroom, she casually told the girl, "Did you know your mom is cheating on your dad?" These incidents sounded bizarre, but I dismissed them, thinking Susan might have overheard these things somewhere and was just trying to scare people. About a year later, Susan came to my house with her cousin, and what I experienced that day terrified me. Susan had changed so much. She used to be bubbly and talkative, but now she was quiet and withdrawn. Her pupils were unnaturally wide, and her presence felt heavy. When she entered my house, it wasn't long before she said something that sent chills down my spine. Someone suffered here so much. This tied to another story I've shared about a ghost in my house, so it felt like she was sensing it. Later, we went to the garden to chat casually. I decided to test her abilities because I was still skeptical. The day before, my mom had argued with a neighbor and stopped talking to her. Susan had no way of knowing this, so I asked if she knew who my mom had been upset with. She looked directly at me, then turned her head slightly, as though whispering to someone unseen. A moment later, she pointed toward the neighbor's house and said, "It's your neighbor." My blood ran cold. She was right. As we continued talking, Susan revealed that she was haunted by two ghosts. At first, she said they tormented her, but over time, they made peace. She now carried a talisman around her neck for protection and had grown accustomed to their presence. I asked her if she could see them, and she explained that while she couldn't see them yet, she could hear them. She added that they promised to reveal themselves fully once they trusted her completely. I know I'm not the only one who has dreamed of having a paranormal experience. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It wasn't until I was in middle school that I learned I might have already been part of something paranormal. It all started at a family party, when my dad told me about strange things that happened when I was just a baby. He began by telling me about one night, a few months after I was born. He was sitting on the couch, watching me in my crib while my mom was out. At some point he dozed off, thinking I'd be fine. What woke him was a sound I made, like the noise a baby makes before crying. He opened his eyes and immediately looked toward my crib, but I wasn't there. Panicked, he heard another sound and looked down. There I was, lying on my back on the floor. He had no idea how I got there. Terrified, he scooped me up and didn't let go of me for the rest of the day. That wasn't the only incident. Another day, I was back in my crib, and my dad stepped outside for a moment to take out the trash. When he came back, he froze in shock. Standing over my crib was a shadowy figure bent forward as if watching me. The figure turned its head toward him, noticing him for the first time. Dad and the shadow stared at each other, locked in an eerie standoff. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. My dad rushed to me, his fear overwhelming. He also told me about strange things that happened when I wasn't there. One night, after walking home from a nearby family party, he entered the house and turned on the light in the mudroom. The light switched off on its own, and when he checked the switch, it had physically moved back down. He was already uneasy as he headed toward the bedroom. When he tried to open the door, the handle wouldn't budge. From the other side, he heard faint laughter, like people snickering. Thinking it was a prank by my uncles, he banged on the door, demanding they open it. The laughter continued. Frustrated and confused, he left the house and stormed back to the party. When he arrived, all my uncles were still there, drunk and clearly not in any condition to have pulled off such a prank. There was no way they could have run back up the hill to the party before my dad got there. One recurring incident became almost routine. Any time my dad wanted to enter the bedroom, he'd have to jiggle the handle, walk away for a few seconds, and then wait for the lock to click open by itself. He even told a friend about it, who teased him for being paranoid. One day, his friend Tom decided to test it out for himself. My dad made sure the door was unlocked and let Tom close it. When Tom tried to reopen it, the door was locked. Dad told him to jiggle the handle and step back. The lock clicked open, just as it always did. These strange events all started after I was born, my dad said. Eventually, they had the house blessed and anointed with holy water, but we still moved out. Hearing these stories from my dad filled me with a mix of fear and excitement. For years, I had wished for a paranormal experience, and now I realize I've been part of one all along. It was a twisted wish finally granted. In 1987, I shared a historic Victorian home in Atlanta's Inman Park neighborhood with 4 roommates. The house, built shortly after the Civil War, was over a century old and had a charm that lured us in despite its age. With 2 stories, 5 bedrooms, and a full basement, it was ideal for a group of young professionals in their 20s. What we didn't expect was that it would also come with a series of inexplicable events that changed how we viewed the supernatural. 1 week after we moved in, our peaceful nights were interrupted. Around 2 or 3 a.m., Hannah, one of our roommates, screamed, waking everyone. We rushed to her room, where she sat up in bed, visibly shaken. She claimed she had seen the shadowy figure of a man standing beside her bed, staring down at her. When she screamed, the figure supposedly turned and walked out of the room. While we chalked it up to nerves or an overactive imagination, Hannah refused to stay in the house alone after that night, insisting the experience was real. 2 weeks later, another disturbing event occurred. In the middle of the night, a loud crash echoed through the hallway that connected our bedrooms. We ran out to discover the glass from a full-length mirror on the bathroom door shattered into hundreds of pieces. Oddly, the mirror's frame remained securely fastened to the door. There were no earthquakes or heavy vehicles nearby that could explain the vibrations needed to break the glass. As time passed, the house's oddities escalated. Objects seemed to move on their own. One evening, while I was alone watching television, 3 candles inexplicably fell from the fireplace mantel, as though an unseen hand had swept them off. Items like car keys or personal belongings would vanish, only to reappear later in places we were certain we hadn't left them. Knocking and tapping sounds emanated from the attic and basement, though no one was ever there. The most unnerving encounter occurred during a party we hosted about 2 months after moving in. A guest, unfamiliar with the house and unaware of its peculiarities, ventured into the basement. She returned moments later, visibly shaken, claiming to have seen a man standing in the corner. When she called out to him, he vanished. We immediately checked the basement, which had only one entrance, but found no one. Her account was chilling, especially since she had no prior knowledge of the house's strange history. After about 6 months, the activity seemed to subside. Life in the house became uneventful, and we started to believe we had perhaps exaggerated or imagined the earlier incidents. But the final validation came unexpectedly. One evening, my wife and I were dining at a restaurant when we struck up a conversation with a couple seated nearby. They were complete strangers, but when they asked where we lived, we mentioned our Inman Park house. Their curiosity piqued, and they asked for the exact address. When we told them, the woman's immediate response was, "Have you seen the ghost yet?" We were floored. They revealed they had rented the same house years earlier and experienced many of the same inexplicable events. Hearing their stories, which matched ours so closely, removed any lingering doubt about the haunting. Every night they were closer. The shadows grew, becoming clearer and clearer as the days passed. I knew they were there, watching me. My house is the last one on the street. I live alone, at the very end, and behind me is nothing but acres of woods. The street just stops, the blacktop broken by tree roots and grass. The only light I have is from a street lamp I had petitioned for years ago. But now, even that light seems useless. I was sitting on my porch one night, scrolling through my phone when I felt it. It was just a feeling at first, like someone was staring at me from the woods. I didn't believe it at first. It was just a shadow, standing still at the edge of the light. But I knew it was looking at me. I called out, asking what it was doing, but there was no response. It didn't even move. It was just a perfect shadow, no features, nothing to distinguish it from the night. I couldn't shake the feeling. Every now and then, I'd look back, and it was still there, watching. Finally, the wind picked up, and the shadows from the trees began to sway, but it didn't move. That's when I started to panic. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside to face it, but when the beam of light hit the shadow, it didn't disappear. It was pure darkness, standing in the shape of a person. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed inside, unsure of what to do. I couldn't call anyone. Who would believe me? I spent the rest of the night staring out the window, watching it. It didn't move, didn't change. Just stayed there waiting. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up, the sun was already rising, and the shadow was gone. What do you think? Have you ever felt like you were being watched, like something is just out there in the dark, waiting for you? This all happened back in the fall of 1982 in Baxter State Park, Maine. At the time, I lived in Manchester, New Hampshire. I'd been hoping for one last camping trip before the weather turned, knowing the region would soon be buried under snow and flooded with out-of-state tourists for the ski season. It was early November, and though the days were still warm, the nights had a crisp chill. It was the perfect weather for sitting by a campfire and relaxing. I've always loved the outdoors. I still do, but that night in Maine would leave a mark on me forever. My husband was working at the hospital, and the kids were staying with my parents for the weekend. I'd called in sick to work, loaded up my Bronco, strapped the canoe to the roof, and hit the road. I didn't have much time, but I made it to the water by late afternoon. This area was one of the most remote spots I knew. I'd been paddling for a while when I spotted the perfect place to camp. I paddled toward the shore, thinking to myself, this is it. I set up my tent, built a fire, and relaxed in my chair as the day slowly turned to night. It wasn't long before I fell asleep in my tent. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds singing. The weather was cooler now, but still perfect for being outside. I grabbed my camera and headed into the woods to take some pictures. I fished for a while, enjoying the peace and quiet of the place. As evening came, I made a small meal and settled into my tent with a flashlight to read. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly, startled by the sound of something moving outside my tent. I froze. My instincts were telling me something wasn't right. I could hear footsteps, slow, careful. There are moose and black bears in these woods. A moose could be dangerous if you surprise it, and the bears usually keep their distance, but this didn't sound like either of them. I stayed as still as I could, listening. Whatever it was had stopped right outside the tent. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a faint shadow moving. It was hard to make out, but I could tell it was big, and then I heard it sniffing, its breath shallow, almost like it was panting. I reached for the zipper of the tent, but just before I could unzip it, I heard it run off. I hurried to open the flap and peeked outside. The trees were swaying, and I heard something moving through the brush, fading into the deep woods. But the sound of its steps told me one important thing. It wasn't an animal. It was on 2 legs. That couldn't be right. I hadn't seen anyone else around since I entered the park. The season for leaf peepers had passed, and this area was far enough out of the way that only people traveling by water could reach it. Still, the idea of someone out there, sneaking around my campsite at night, sent a wave of unease through me. As the sun rose the next day, I ate my breakfast, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. There was something, or someone, just out of sight, observing me from the trees. I always carried a .45 revolver when I camped up here, not because I was afraid of wildlife, but because you never know what kind of people you might come across in the wilderness. In my experience, the scariest thing you can encounter when you're alone in the woods is another person. I wasn't sure if someone was out there, but my nerves were getting the best of me. That night, as the darkness settled in, I stayed inside my tent, my revolver close by and my boots on. I wasn't taking any chances. I must have fallen asleep again, but I woke to movement. The air outside was still, but the shadows around me seemed to shift. There were sounds, sniffing, low growls, raspy breathing, all around me. Panic surged through me. What was happening? The shadows around the tent grew taller and bigger. I could hear the growls, the low, deliberate sounds coming from all sides. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. Were these coyotes? No, these were different. And the size of the shadows, they were too big. I pulled my revolver from its holster and fired a shot into the air. The next moments were a blur. I scrambled out of my tent with just my clothes, the gun, and my truck keys in my pocket. I ran straight for the canoe, dragging it into the water, and jumped in. I started paddling hard, not looking back until I was far enough from the shore. When I finally did look back, I saw them. They were standing on the riverbank, crouched low, heads down. Their eyes glowed in the moonlight. There were 6 of them. I couldn't believe my eyes. They looked like giant coyotes or wolves, but then they did something that will stay with me forever. They started standing up on their hind legs, one by one. Each one slowly rose to its full height, standing like a man. I stared, frozen, unable to believe what I was seeing. These creatures, these things, had almost ambushed me. I turned and paddled furiously, my heart racing as their howls echoed behind me. I haven't been back to the forest since that night. This all happened a year ago, but I still can't stop thinking about it, no matter how hard I try. In the quiet moments, my mind always goes back to that night. The night I learned just how real the fear of the dark can be. My sister lives in a small town, a bit of a drive away. I hadn't visited her in a while, so I decided to take a week off to see her. I was bringing gifts and clothes I'd outgrown. She's an amazing cook, so I was looking forward to spending the week with her, enjoying home-cooked meals and a break from the constant noise of the internet. I packed my bags and hit the road, excited for a quiet week away. But in the rush of getting everything ready, I didn't leave until late in the day. By the time I hit the highway, the sun was already setting. I knew I wouldn't get to her place until around 11 p.m., so I planned to call when I was getting close, and she could greet me at the door. The highway was dark, with miles of farmland around me. At some points, the road cut through dense trees. That's when I saw something I never expected. There, on the side of the road, was a figure. I slowed down, my headlights catching the glimmer of a white sweater. It was a small figure, so I figured it was probably a child. I pulled over to see if they needed help. I've never seen anyone walking alone on the highway like that, especially this far out. No houses, no cars. I had no idea where this kid had come from. When I stopped, they stopped too. I waved, but the figure didn't say anything. I got out and walked toward them, my heart racing a little. It wasn't the smartest move, but something in me pushed me forward. As I got closer, I realized it was a boy, no older than 13. His clothes were too big, and his long, wavy hair covered part of his face. His hair was white. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to get a better look. His face was pale, almost silver in the dim light. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. "What are you doing out here?" He spoke in a voice so soft I could barely hear him. "I was wondering if I could get a ride to the next town over," he asked. "Of course," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Why are you out here, sweetie?" He didn't answer, just followed me silently, his bare feet barely making a sound on the road. I couldn't shake the oddness of it all, but I was more concerned with making sure he was okay than anything else. When he climbed into the passenger seat, I could see him more clearly. His skin almost shimmered in the light. He looked frail, almost fragile, like he could break at any moment. He looked too vulnerable, too small for someone with bad intentions. I handed him a bottle of water, and he drank it without a word. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to make him feel more comfortable. "Nicky," I said, introducing myself, hoping he might share his name too. But he didn't. He just sat there, quiet, staring ahead into the night. I couldn't believe it when he spoke again. His voice was so soft, I could barely hear him. At least I had gotten a name out of him. But I still needed more answers. "What were you doing on the side of the road? Do you have someone I could call?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle, hoping it would encourage him to speak more. "I'm heading to the next town to meet an acquaintance," he replied, almost whispering. "He's an officer. I have no one you can contact." He paused, then added, "If it's possible, I'd like a ride to the police station. But please, don't go out of your way for me." At least the kid was polite, I thought. I wondered what I should do next. He wasn't injured, and he wanted to go to the police. I could just drive him there. No need to call anyone. It really wouldn't be any trouble, and he didn't seem like a threat. He was small, and even if he tried something, I figured I could handle it. "All right, I'll take you," I said, starting the car. "Are you sure there's no one I can call for you?" I asked again, just to be sure. He shook his head. It seemed either he didn't have any family, or he was avoiding them. Either way, he was on his way to some help, and I wasn't going to press him on it. I put in the directions to the police station, and we were off. The whole situation felt a little strange, but not in a supernatural way, at least not yet. Ellie, as he introduced himself, didn't say a word while we drove. He must have been exhausted from walking. Before long, I noticed him nodding off, his head resting gently against the seat. I couldn't help but feel a little comforted that he trusted me enough to sleep next to me like that. I sent a quick message to my sister, telling her I'd be late. We drove in silence for a while, until something caught my eye. In the distance, a car was just sitting in the middle of the road. I slowed down, pulling up a few feet from it, staring at the odd sight. We were on a highway, but it was the middle of the night. No other cars were in sight. Any cars coming from behind us would have had plenty of time to stop, so I figured we were safe. But what was with the car? The driver's side and passenger doors were wide open. I was just about to undo my seat belt and step out when I felt a small hand grip my arm. It made me jump. "Keep driving," Ellie said, his voice sharp. It was no longer the soft, childlike tone I'd heard earlier. It was firm and urgent. "But someone could be hurt," I stammered, not sure how to respond. "They're already gone." His words froze me. I stared at him, trying to make sense of it. Who was this kid, and why was I trusting him? The car in the middle of the road. It had to be a trap. If I stepped out, I could be dragged into the woods by whoever set it up. As I pulled my attention away from Ellie, I saw something move on the road ahead of us. A large dog appeared, trotting out from the trees. At first, I thought it was a husky, but the more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't a dog. It was a wolf. I'd never seen one up close before, and I had no idea they could be this big. Its yellow eyes locked onto mine, watching us, waiting for a reaction, and then another one emerged from the trees, its eyes glowing in the dark. This was insane. Wolves didn't live in this area. Coyotes, maybe, but not wolves. I couldn't make sense of it. The car in the middle of the road, the wolves circling around it. It didn't add up. And then, something even more impossible happened. The wolf closest to the car stood up, rising to its back legs. My heart stopped. I watched in shock as it transformed, its body growing and shifting into something far more terrifying. A hulking creature, towering over the road. It looked like a wolf, but it was more, a nightmare made flesh. "Drive!" Ellie's voice was sharp, commanding. He gripped my arm so tightly that it hurt, pulling me back to reality. "I don't understand," I whispered, still frozen in disbelief. "Silver Cane," the creature outside growled in a booming voice. "A pleasure it is, running into you here." I could barely process what was happening. The creature's body was covered in rough, dark fur, with a large, wolf-like head and legs still bent like a wolf's. It was massive, standing upright like a man but still so much more beast than human. "Is that a werewolf?" I asked, the question sounding insane even as it left my lips. But looking at the creature, I couldn't deny it. Monsters weren't real, right? But this one was right in front of me, its glowing eyes fixed on us. I turned to Ellie, hoping for some explanation, but his face was unreadable. He looked away, clearly not wanting to acknowledge the impossible truth. Before I could speak again, the creature outside spoke again. "Come out. We have such treats tonight," it said, stepping toward the car with unnatural speed. It ripped off the back door of the car with ease, reaching inside and pulling something out. My stomach churned as I saw what it was, a stuffed rabbit. A person had been inside that car. The horror of it all hit me, and I reached for my seat belt, not sure what I was even planning to do. Ellie squeezed my arm, his voice suddenly grave. "I told you. They're already gone. Do not leave this car. I cannot protect you if you do." I was shaking, barely able to comprehend the situation. The child beside me wasn't the weak, frail boy I picked up off the side of the road anymore. He was something else, something far more dangerous than the creatures outside. I turned to the monster again, my mind spinning. Its yellow eyes gleamed with cruel intent, a twisted grin spreading across its face. It knew what it had done, and it wasn't done yet. I couldn't just sit there. I had to do something. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, heading straight for the creature in front of us. The creature didn't move fast enough. The car hit it, knocking it back, but not as hard as I had hoped. Then I threw the car into reverse, slamming over the wolf's legs. It howled in pain, but I couldn't stop. I knew I'd done damage, but I didn't think it was enough. The others in the woods, more wolves, watched us from the shadows. I could see them glaring, ready to strike. But Ellie must have done something. The wolves stayed back, allowing us to escape. I kept driving, the sound of my car grinding against the road and the engine protesting under the strain. I didn't know what else to do but drive. Was that stupid? I finally asked, my voice shaky. "Yes, but justified," Ellie replied, his voice steady despite everything. I almost laughed, the absurdity of it all sinking in, but it didn't feel right to laugh. Not yet. I glanced at the speedometer. I was well over the speed limit, but I didn't care. A ticket was nothing compared to what might be out there. Ellie stayed silent as we drove, the road stretching on endlessly. The weight of the night pressed down on me, and I finally spoke again. "Are those things going to find me?" I asked, my voice quieter this time. "No, I doubt it," Ellie said, his tone serious. "They don't know your connection to me." He paused before adding, "But now that you've encountered them, you're more likely to face other, supernatural threats. It could be days or years from now. I don't know, but it's almost guaranteed." I felt a chill crawl over me. "Great," I muttered. Ellie didn't seem to mind. He looked out the window, his thoughts elsewhere. "You did me a favor tonight," he said softly. "So I'll return it." He looked back at me, and I could see something in his eyes, something I hadn't noticed before. "If you come across something of the night, and if you have the chance, Tell them you're useful to the Silver Cane." I frowned, not sure what that meant, but he continued, "You can only use my name once, and I don't promise that they'll spare you, but it might help." I didn't know much about his world, but it seemed like a huge favor, and somehow it made me feel safer. He'd saved me twice tonight, just because I gave him a ride. "Thank you," I said quietly, a small smile tugging at my lips. He nodded and opened the door. The night felt different now, like it held more danger than I'd ever known. But for now, I was alive, and that was enough. It was late, and I waited, watching until he reached the steps of the police station. It had become a habit, checking to make sure he got inside safely. I knew he could handle himself, but I couldn't shake the feeling of needing to make sure he was all right. I sent a quick message to my sister, letting her know I'd be a little late. Then, I drove off, leaving the strange situation behind. Since that night, nothing odd had happened. I sold my old car while staying at my sister's and bought a new one. Just in case, I thought, in case a certain wolf remembered what happened that night. I didn't tell my sister everything that had happened, just that I'd found a kid on the side of the road and turned him in. There had been a report about a car found on the highway, but I didn't want to know anything else about it. I didn't want to know who had been lost that night, or what had happened to them. But I still think about it. I wonder how Ellie is doing, and who he was meeting that night. But deep down, I know it's better if I never find those answers. Better if I never see him again. When I was 4, my parents moved to a small town in the West Virginia wilderness. They wanted to get away from the noise and high cost of Charleston. They wanted peace and privacy. Our new house was a 2-story, 4-bedroom place. It was perfect for us. 2 of the bedrooms became an office for my parents, and 1 became my playroom. My parents both worked from home, so the office space was necessary. As for the playroom, it was a place where I could leave my toys scattered around without a care. I loved that house. It felt safe, more than anywhere else in that town. I started school when I was the right age, and there weren't many kids, so making friends was easy. By the time I reached 6th grade, I had made friends with everyone. But something changed when I was 12. The town, the air, even the way the birds sounded, they all felt off. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the stillness. Sometimes it felt like the world was holding its breath. I didn't know what it was, but it was unsettling. I usually woke up early around 6 in the morning. I'd take a shower, then spend some time playing my DS before school. The bus would come at 8:15, so I liked having those extra few minutes to myself. One day, though, I lost track of time and realized the bus had already left. No big deal, I thought. School didn't start until 9 o'clock. It was only a mile away, so I decided to walk. The walk felt wrong from the start. The town was small, but there was usually someone driving by at that time of morning, or kids walking to school. That day, there was nothing. No cars, no people. The streets were empty. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a certainty. I knew something was out there, hidden, just waiting for the right moment. School didn't help. Even though I tried to sit away from the windows, the feeling didn't go away. After class, I stood outside, waiting for the bus, and that's when I saw it. As one of the buses passed by, I caught a glimpse of something in the back window. It wasn't human. It was tall, its skin dark as night, and its eyes, just white dots staring back at me. I froze. The moment I snapped back to reality, the bus driver called out for me to get on. I stumbled, trying to shake off the fear that had taken hold. That night, sleep didn't come. My mind was stuck on what I had seen. The next morning, I told my parents I was sick and stayed home. They didn't believe me at first, but let me stay home anyway. The whole day, all I could think about was that thing I saw. Years passed, and I didn't see it again, until one winter day, just before Christmas break. We were watching movies in class, and I sat by the window, looking out at the falling snow. That's when I saw it again, standing just outside the school, staring at me. This time, I could see it clearly. It was huge, at least 7 or 8 feet tall. Its arms hung low, almost dragging on the ground, and its legs were always bent in a strange, unnatural way. I watched it for what felt like hours, until it finally turned and walked away into the snow. I couldn't shake the memory of it. When I got home, my parents had news on the TV. A 13-year-old boy had been found on a small road nearby, mauled to death. The police thought it was a bear attack, but I knew it wasn't. I knew what I had seen. That night, my fear became real. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. At some point, I woke up in the middle of the night to find my parents' room door wide open. I saw the shadow of that creature moving across the floor. In a panic, I grabbed a gun from my parents' room and crept downstairs, hoping I could stop whatever it was before it came for me. But when I looked out the back window, it was gone. I went upstairs to check on my parents. What I found still haunts me to this day. It wasn't a bear that had attacked them. The police didn't believe me when I told them what happened. They ruled me out as a suspect and sent me into the foster care system. I was eventually adopted by a family in South Carolina who wanted to give older kids a chance at a new life. I still think about what happened that night. I hope by now someone has caught that thing. If not, well, we all know what that means. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I jumped up, checking the time. 7:36 a.m. The uneasy feeling was gone, but I had to be sure. I looked out the window and felt a wave of relief when I saw that the shadow was gone. I replayed the events of last night over and over in my mind. Maybe it had all been a dream. That had to be it. Or maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe both. It took me nearly an hour to gather the courage to go outside and check the spot where the shadow had stood. What I saw made my stomach turn. 2 imprints were pressed into the grass, like something had been standing in the same spot for hours. My heart sank. There was something in my yard last night. I backed away from the spot, never taking my eyes off the strange marks. Was it still there? Invisible, just waiting to get me. But if that were true, why didn't I feel the same heavy unease I had felt before? Was it connected to the shadow at all? I prayed it wouldn't come back to answer these questions. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. It was my day off, so I just took it easy, watched TV, went grocery shopping, paid some bills. I didn't really remember much else, except for the constant feeling of dread that crept in as nightfall approached. I hoped the shadow wouldn't return. How I longed to be back in the comfort of my day before the dread took over. When night came, I tried to keep my mind busy. I cooked dinner, turned on a comedy show, and just let the night pass. By the time the hour came, I was starting to feel a little more at ease. It was well past the time the shadow appeared the night before. I stepped outside for a quick smoke, lit it up, and checked the time on my phone. That's when it hit me again, the feeling. Stronger this time. I looked up. There it was. Closer than before, more defined. This time, I didn't have to strain my eyes to see it. A whimper slipped out of my mouth as I scanned the rest of the tree line. And then I saw another one. It was standing just outside the shadow cast by one of the trees, closer to the road. The figure stood in the same pose, arms hanging by its sides, but now it was facing me. I screamed, stumbling back, knocking over a chair. Before I even knew it, I was shouting at them, demanding to know what they wanted. My fear had twisted into anger. I marched out onto the stoop, my eyes frantically scanning the ground for something to throw. I spotted a small rock by the step, grabbed it, and threw it at the first shadow. It hit the shadow right in the chest and dropped to the ground. But there was no sound, no impact. The shadow didn't move. I called out again, "What do you want?" Of course, no answer. That's when I realized there were no sounds, no crickets, no birds, Not a single rustle in the trees, just the hum of the street lamp above. I looked from the first shadow to the second. The unease grew stronger the longer I stared. I wanted them to move, say something, anything, but they didn't. I retreated to the porch, still watching them, until it was over, but they didn't move, not once. What were they? Why did they make me feel like this? I thought about who I could tell, who would believe me. If I told anyone, they'd probably lock me up. I didn't have many friends, and my family was hours away. I felt so alone in that moment. After what felt like forever, I went back inside and sat by the window again. I could barely see the second shadow from here, but as long as it didn't move, I would be fine. Hours passed, and they didn't move, but the unease stayed with me. Eventually, sleep took over, and before I knew it, I was waking up. 8:42 a.m. I was late for work. I called my manager, apologized, and told her I wasn't feeling well. She was understanding, said they were overstaffed, so it was fine. I asked if she could find someone to cover my shifts for the rest of the week. She agreed after a bit of back and forth. I needed time to figure this out, or get out. I spent the day brainstorming a plan for the night. I needed to get footage of them, prove what was happening. Why hadn't I thought of that before? But what would I do after? I couldn't even get close to them because of that terrible feeling. I thought maybe I could shoot video, but I didn't have the money or the time for that. I decided to stick with just observing tonight, and maybe from there, I'd figure out my next step. Waiting for nightfall felt like torture. I couldn't eat. I tried to nap because I hadn't slept well the last few days, but every time I drifted off, the shadows consumed my mind, and I jolted awake. All I could do was sit and wait. Finally, night fell, and I stepped out onto the porch, phone in hand, checking the time occasionally. The usual sounds of nature filled the air: crickets, cicadas, the odd bird chirping in the distance. For a moment, I held on to a tiny bit of hope that maybe the shadows wouldn't show up. Then, at 9:07 p.m., the sounds stopped, and all I could hear was the hum of the street lamp. My stomach dropped. I already knew what that meant, but I looked up anyway. The first shadow had moved. It was a few feet closer to my house. The second one had halved its distance. I scanned the yard and saw two more, one on the opposite side of the yard, the other standing in the middle of the street. They were more solid now, darker, standing out more than they had before. I walked to the door, stuck my head out just enough to see. The air felt heavy, malicious. I was sweating, feeling faint. I opened the camera on my phone and aimed it at the first shadow. It was only about 12 feet from my door now. My hands shook as I tried to steady the phone enough to focus. After what seemed like forever, it finally did. I snapped a few pictures. I backed into the porch, trying to steady my breathing. I looked at the shadows. No change. I opened the photos, hoping for a clear shot. But of course, they were blurry. I had to try again, but something inside me screamed not to. It took a few minutes for me to find the courage to open the door again. I stuck my head out, aimed my phone, and waited for the camera to focus. It took a moment, but when it did, I knew I'd have a clear shot. As I pressed the button to snap the picture, the street lamp flickered. Just for a second, but it ruined the photo. I cursed under my breath, and the lamp flickered again, twice more, as I tried to get the camera ready again. And that's when I looked up. The shadows had moved. The first had taken a step forward. The second and third were in the middle of their step. The fourth one, it looked hunched, like it was getting ready to sprint. I screamed, dropped my phone, and stumbled back. I bolted for the door, not even thinking. I rushed out onto the stoop to grab my phone from the ground. The lamp flickered once more. Fear hit me like a wave, and I froze. The first shadow had lifted its foot. The second and third had finished their steps. The fourth was even further hunched now. I didn't think. My body just moved. I left my phone, ran inside, and locked the door behind me. I tried to figure out why the lamp kept flickering. Could the shadows be doing it? No, if they could control the light, they would have done that from the start. It was probably just a bulb issue. I needed to call the electric company. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone, but it wasn't there. The lamp flickered again, twice more, and I began to feel dizzy, my vision blurred. I leaned against the fridge for support, but it wasn't enough. My last memory of that night was hitting the floor. I woke up. Sunlight poured through the windows. I felt weak. My body was drained. I hadn't eaten the day before and barely slept. It was almost noon. I stumbled to the porch, squinting as the bright sunlight hit my eyes. I picked up my phone. It was broken. I sat down on the step and cried. These things were going to get me. I knew it. I ran through my options. I could leave, maybe stay with my parents for a few days, but I'd eventually have to come back. And when I did, how many shadows would be waiting for me? No, I decided. I was going to fight them. This was my home. As long as the light touched them, they couldn't move. I would find a way to make them stay away. I could get a bow. I hadn't used one since I was a kid, but I'm pretty sure I left them in my bedroom. Awesome. I managed to squeeze past the circle of shadows and make my way around the house. I wasn't getting through the front door. I looked at the damage they did to my screen in the porch, and a shiver ran down my spine. What would have happened if they had caught me? Walking back to my bedroom, I felt a sense of relief. I won. I was definitely moving out of here tomorrow, I thought, but it was a small price to pay. I walked past the living room door and glanced inside, seeing them frozen, trying to make their way out the door to get to me. In my rush, I clipped the door frame with my headlamp, knocking it off my head. I didn't stop to pick it up. There wasn't time. I had to get out of there. As I entered my bedroom, I reached to turn on the light and immediately realized something was wrong. The light switch was off. That didn't make sense. I had left every light on earlier. Before I could react, something icy cold grabbed my waist and flung me into the darkness on the other side of the room. I tried to stand, but I was shoved onto the floor. My wrists burned. It was freezing. I screamed, twisting around to strike at my attacker, but there was nothing to hit. A sharp pain shot up my arm. My throat went cold, and before I knew it, I was lifted off the floor and slammed into the wall. I couldn't breathe. I kicked my legs, trying to get free, but it felt like fighting against a solid wall. I lashed out, but it only hurt me more. Desperate, I fumbled in my pocket for a lighter. I tried to light it, but I was losing consciousness. The flame finally caught, and the soft light illuminated the space around me, and the shadow holding me. It froze. Surprisingly, its grip loosened just a bit. I moved slowly, careful not to blow out the flame. With my left hand, I reached up, grabbing the shadow's forearm. I pulled, and its hand began to lift off me. The flame flickered as I exhaled, trying not to panic. It stayed lit. I was almost free. The hand finally came off. Just as I felt the pressure release, the shadow jerked, and my body shifted. The flame went out. Before I could even think to light the lighter again, I felt the shadow close and around me. This time, the cold was unbearable, like it was cutting through my skin. The shadow slammed me into the wall again, and I dropped the lighter. My head went through the sheetrock. My vision started to fade. It felt like a child fighting against an adult, hopeless and weak. I tried to fight, but I knew one more blow would be it. But I was strangely calm. Going didn't seem so bad anymore. The shadow pulled back, almost like it was savoring the moment, knowing this would be the last hit. I smiled, a small chuckle escaping me, using every last bit of energy. I thought, who would have thought I'd be taken by a shadow? That must have pissed it off. The next hit was harder than all the others. I heard a crack. I assumed it was me, but at that point, it didn't matter. I let myself be swallowed by the darkness. It felt comforting. For all this time, I had been afraid of the dark. If I had known it would feel this peaceful, I would have run toward it. "Bill," he said, "go into the woods. Hide. I'll take care of the bear." I'd like to say I told him I wouldn't leave him, but I didn't. I ran. I was about 1,000 feet away when I heard the shots. 1, 2, clean, practiced. I didn't stop running. I was crying, my legs shaking. I didn't know how many shots my dad fired. I didn't remember when the screaming started, but it didn't sound like my dad. It sounded like a woman from one of those horror movies. I stayed hidden in the underbrush, sobbing, until I heard it, the thing running toward me, faster than it should have been able to move. It burst from the woods and crested the hill. Its flesh was torn in patches, yellow eyes peering through holes in what looked like a burlap sack on its head. It stopped, stretched in the moonlight. Then it yelled. "Bill!" It wasn't a bear. Carl explained to my dad that he and his team had been inspecting a site when they came across something unexpected. They were headed to a small cavern nestled near the base of a mountain, hidden in a narrow gully. The spot had been known by locals for years, but it wasn't something anyone really paid attention to until someone went a little deeper inside. As it turned out, the cavern stretched much farther than anyone thought. Not long after they entered, they made an interesting discovery. One of the prospectors found a large, circular stone slab just lying there at the end of one of the tunnels. It was perfectly round, and its shape made it clear that it hadn't been there by accident. Someone had intentionally cut it. This raised some serious questions. If they found evidence of ancient remains, the site would have to be handed over to archaeologists. But the district where the cavern was located had a rule. Archaeology came first. That meant if any sign of human presence was discovered, my dad and Carl's team would have to abandon the site and lose out on the job. It might have been wrong, but Carl was eager to get things moving before archaeologists could take over. He wanted to start digging, get things underway before anyone else got involved. My dad, though, wasn't so sure. He felt conflicted but decided to at least see the place for himself before making any big decisions. When they finally arrived, Carl introduced my dad to the rest of the team. They didn't waste much time with pleasantries. They were all eager to get started. The entrance to the cavern was narrow and hidden behind thick foliage. The air inside was hot and humid, and my dad joked that he felt like he was sweating like a pig. He had to squeeze around a few tight bends before the cavern began to open up. Carl led him deeper, showing him areas they planned to explore. The walls were lined with thick green veins, which meant they were likely sitting on rich copper ore. They reached the first chamber, which Carl called Alpha, and from there, the cavern branched out in 2 directions. One of those tunnels led to the stone slab. My dad remembers seeing it clearly. The slab was massive, at least 10 feet across, he said. It was perfectly circular, almost like a giant manhole cover. The way it was placed there made him feel like it was meant to block something. There was this strange sense of unease, a feeling he couldn't shake. He and Carl discussed it with the rest of the team and decided to pick another spot to start digging. Days passed, and the operation got up and running. The team was busy mining, and the site began to grow. But while all this was happening, the slab stayed untouched. No one went near it. A few weeks later, they had a full-fledged operation running 24/7. One team focused on expanding the tunnel system, while another worked on extracting exposed veins of copper. Everything seemed to be going well. But my dad still wasn't sure about the slab. There was something about it that bothered him. And that's when things started to get strange. It was just another day in the mine, my dad says, when he and some of the other men were working on expanding the tunnels. They were taking a short break when one of the workers made a joke. My dad chuckled, but the other man quickly shushed him. The guy's eyes darted around the room, and my dad was about to ask what was wrong when he heard it too. It was a soft, humming sound echoing through the tunnel. It was almost like someone was singing a low, quiet tune. The noise lasted for a minute before fading away. It was early, and my dad knew that he and the 2 other men were supposed to be the only ones in the mine at the time. So where had the humming come from? They didn't find anyone else in the cavern when they checked, and my dad didn't really know how to explain it. He didn't think much more of it though, at least not at first. A few days later, things took another turn. My dad was outside having a meeting with Carl when the screen started. Frantic, terrified screams echoed from the cavern. The group froze for a moment before a man ran out of the cave, his eyes wide with fear. He was rambling, muttering about something. The man didn't stop when they called after him. He just kept running, straight to the camp. My dad remembers the terror in his eyes. The man grabbed his lunch and dashed off into the nearby jungle, still whispering to himself. No one ever saw him again. No one knew what had happened to him, either. He was alone in a quiet part of the mine at the time. Workers said they heard him scream before he ran out, but when they went to look for him, there was nothing unusual. Later, one of the other workers translated what the man had been shouting. "This place is evil. We shouldn't have come." The crew was rattled after that, but Carl and the other foreman managed to keep things under control. My dad says he didn't say anything, but looking back, he wishes he had. He wishes he'd listened to that man and pulled everyone out of there while they had the chance. The day was far from over, though. Just before quitting time, another worker made a strange discovery. That huge stone slab, it had been moved. Everyone swore they hadn't touched it. My dad knew the slab weighed at least a ton, maybe more. There was no way they could have moved it without a team of people. When they looked underneath, they found a deep hole, much deeper than they could see. Someone dropped a pebble down, but they never heard it hit the bottom. They wanted to drop a flare down there, but my dad stopped them. He was worried it might ignite some gas deep in the earth. Looking down into that hole, my dad felt a wave of dread wash over him. It was as if something was watching him from the other side. The next few days were full of tension. The atmosphere in the mine had shifted. Conversations had stopped, replaced by uneasy silence. It was like the place itself had changed. My dad would hear whispers, sometimes faint and barely audible, but he wasn't sure if he was just imagining them. And there were shadows, shadows that seemed to move in strange ways, always just out of sight. He had trouble sleeping too. Horrific nightmares would wake him up in a cold sweat, though he could never remember what they were about. He chalked it up to stress and lack of sleep. Miners have a term for it, miner's fever. Being underground for so long can mess with a person's mind. But deep down, my dad knew something was wrong. He couldn't explain it, but every part of him was screaming for him to leave. The only thing that kept him there was the fear of ridicule and the pressure to make a living. A week after the slab was moved, things finally took a turn for the worse. My dad and Carl were with a few others when a sudden loud crack echoed through the cavern. The men froze, and then the faint rumbling began. They knew what that meant. Without thinking, they scrambled to get out of the cavern, but it was too late. The ground shook, and the next thing my dad remembers was the deafening crash of boulders and debris as the cave collapsed around them. When he came to, he was trapped, pinned under rubble. His legs were stuck, and the only thing that kept him from suffocating was the small pocket of air where his upper body was exposed. His heart raced and panic threatened to set in. He managed to get a Zippo lighter from his pocket and flicked it on. The small flame lit up the area, revealing a gruesome sight just a few feet away. A gloved hand, sticking out from the rocks. The rest of the body was crushed beneath a boulder. My dad had to look away. He threw up, sickened by the sight. He couldn't get that image out of his head. But there was more. Faint moans echoed through the rubble, voices calling out for help. One voice sounded closer than the others, and my dad recognized it as belonging to a local worker named Rico. They spoke for hours. Rico's arm was trapped, and he couldn't feel his legs. He was in bad shape, but my dad did his best to keep him calm. As they waited, my dad could hear rescue teams trying to dig them out, but there was still so much darkness around them. Rico, in his pain, muttered one last thing. Guillermo was right. This place, it's evil. My dad didn't know what to say to that. He still doesn't. What do you think? Could there be something to that? It was clear that the cave-in was either a cruel twist of nature or perhaps caused by human error, but Rico believed there was more to it. "We shouldn't have come here, Mr. Johnson," he said in a hoarse whisper. "We woke it up." At first, my dad thought Rico was just delusional from his injuries, but Rico was insistent. "I heard the voices. I saw it. It warned me to go. I should have listened. Dad tried to calm him down, but nothing seemed to help. Not long after, Rico stopped speaking altogether. Dad said he could still hear faint whispers, desperate prayers, and quiet weeping. It was unclear how long they had been trapped, but the situation began to wear on my father too. His stomach growled with hunger, his lips were dry, and his head throbbed with dehydration. His legs had gone numb, and the reality of being stuck underground was sinking in. Dad started to wonder if he'd ever see daylight again. Through the faint whispers of Rico's prayers, my dad started to hear something else. It was a sound he couldn't quite explain. Laughter. Not the laughter of someone truly happy, but the kind that's almost mocking. Sometimes it sounded like it came from Rico, but other times it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. It came from ahead, behind, and even below them. Then suddenly, Rico stopped praying. Dad didn't notice right away until Rico spoke again. "It's in here," he said, his voice low and shaky. Dad tried to get him to respond, but Rico didn't answer. His breathing grew erratic. Then, without warning, Rico screamed. It was a scream of terror, raw, gut-wrenching fear that echoed through the dark, damp cave. Dad rushed to calm him, but the terror in Rico's voice only grew louder. It lasted for about 30 seconds, and then, just as suddenly as it began, Rico's screams stopped. Dad still isn't sure if Rico stopped on his own or if something else made him silent. He was on the brink of panic by then, barely holding himself together. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Dad heard a rustling noise behind him, like the sound of someone carelessly kicking gravel. He called out, but no one answered. It felt as though someone was there, just out of sight. He heard pebbles scattering, rocks creaking, but there were no voices anymore. In the distance, Dad thought he could hear the sound of rescuers working, but as exhaustion set in, those sounds began to blend together, growing almost musical, and soon he drifted into a restless sleep. It was likely his weakened state causing him to lose consciousness. When he woke up, it felt like he was in a dream. A searing light filled his vision, and for a moment he thought he had died. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized he was in a hospital room. The beeping of machines and the hurried movement of medical staff became clearer. His body was heavy, and when he tried to move, several figures rushed in to hold him still. "Rob, it's me, Carl. Easy, you're okay." Dad froze, recognizing Carl's voice. He stopped struggling and took a deep breath, trying to process what had happened. Carl explained that the rescue team had found Dad after 6 long days underground. He was malnourished, dehydrated, and had 2 broken legs. They weren't sure how he had survived, but he was one of the lucky ones. Carl told him that Dad had been unconscious for 2 days, and the doctors weren't sure if he'd ever wake up. When Dad finally regained his strength enough to talk, he remembered the strange things that had happened in the cave, though it all felt like a distant dream. Still, Carl seemed to confirm that it wasn't a dream. The team had cleared out the entire cave, but Dad was the last one they found. "How many were taken?" Dad asked, his voice shaking. Carl sighed and sat down beside him, glancing toward the door. 7 unaccounted for, Carl said quietly. "Unaccounted for," Dad repeated, confused. "There was someone with me, Rico. I heard him." Carl shook his head. "Not when we found you." Dad didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "There was someone right beside me. I heard Rico." Carl's face was serious. "Not when we found you." "No one. No bodies, no traces. Nothing." Dad couldn't find the words. His mind was racing. What did that mean? How could it be true? Carl didn't offer any further explanation. Maybe they found another way out. Maybe they're still down there, Dad suggested, but Carl didn't seem convinced. "They searched the whole system," Carl said, shaking his head. "There's nothing." Dad pressed on, still refusing to give up hope. "But what about the slab? The big one?" Carl gave a short laugh, but it was bitter. "It's back on top of the hole, just like it was when we found you." Dad stared at him, not sure how to process this. Carl scoffed again. Maybe the cave-in moved it. Or maybe something else did. At that, a shiver ran down Dad's spine. He remembered Rico's words, but he brushed them off as the ramblings of a dying man. Now, though, the thought of them felt different, more real. But even after all these years, Dad still wasn't sure what to make of it. Carl stood up and looked at him, his face worn. "We may never know what happened down there," he said softly, "but I'm shutting down the project. It's over." He paused, looking down at his hands. "Get some rest. When you're ready, I'll get you a flight back home." As Carl walked away, Dad stopped him with one last question. Did they ever find out what caused the collapse? Carl's expression darkened. Nothing conclusive. Seismic readings were normal. Could have been a root, but I don't think so. He sighed deeply, his voice quieter. Some places are better left alone. Dad was left with his thoughts, wondering what was real and what wasn't. He signed himself out of the hospital later that day, and within 24 hours, he was back home. I remember that day clearly. I was around 16 when my dad returned in a wheelchair. My mom was upset, but Dad assured us it was just a car accident, nothing to worry about. It was a lie, of course, but we believed it. His physical injuries healed in a few months, but the mental scars never did. Years later, my dad confessed to me. "I'm sorry I lied to you, son. I didn't want to worry you. I didn't know how to explain it all." He looked me in the eye, and for the first time, I believed him. "You really went through all of that, didn't you?" I asked, still struggling to grasp the truth. Dad sighed, a faraway look in his eyes. "It's the truth, son, and that's why I left the industry. Some things aren't meant to be found. Dark things we have no power over." After that, we talked for a while more, but the story was the same. It had happened, and it was the reason my dad changed. He refused to tell me where it all took place, but he agreed that I could share the story with others. And now, I'm sharing it with you. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I used to work the graveyard shift, and Molly, my coworker, was almost always late. Around 11 p.m., it never really mattered to Robert. As long as he didn't have to be there, he didn't mind. Molly was sweet, though, so it wasn't a big deal. One night, I showed up around 3:15 a.m. to take care of a few customers. A few folks came in for coffee before the game. Football was the only thing this sleepy town cared about on weekdays, so there was a bit of a rush. A couple of families came in for hot chocolate and vanilla lattes. I loved making those, especially since I had all the time to practice my little art. I made a tiny lily pad and a flower on one little girl's hot chocolate, but she didn't seem impressed. I almost wish I'd drawn something else, like maybe a middle finger. The rush ended around 7:30 with an older man, tan skin and all, who ordered just hot water in a to-go cup. He didn't even hesitate when I asked, just nodded and said, "Yeah, that's it." I couldn't help but look at him for a second. His eyes were dark and wide, bags heavy under them. His wrinkles creased around his eyes, and there was this thick beard under his lips. I felt myself get a little flushed. "No, sir, I'm good. Thank you, though," I said, trying to avoid looking at his check. He only got water, so there was no charge. "All right, stay warm out there," I said, smiling, then turned back to the coffee bar, wiping down a spoon with a rag. But then, something felt off. I glanced back. He was still standing there, watching me. "Is there anything else I can get you?" I asked, my stomach turning. I hated moments like this, alone, in the middle of nowhere, with someone who made me feel uneasy. The lights of the Exxon across the street were starting to go off as the clerk probably closed up for the night. I felt the loneliness creep up again. "Hey, what time do you get off tonight?" he asked, like we were friends, like we were going to catch a movie afterward. I flinched. "I'm working a double, so I get off at 2 a.m. "Late hours," he said, almost like it was a shared secret. Yeah, late hours, I replied, trying to end the conversation and walk towards the back. Why'd you guys put all this glass in here? He called out after me as I stepped into the kitchen. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my phone, setting it to call 911 if needed. I set it down, fingers hovering over the green button, just in case. Better safe than sorry, right? More natural light, I answered. We thought it would bring in more people. He smiled back at me, glancing around at the empty store. Did it? I couldn't help but laugh, shaking my head. Not really. Finally, he turned toward the glass door, glancing up and down, before slipping outside with a wave. I exhaled, letting out the breath I had been holding in since he walked in. I turned back to the counter, feeling my hands shake a little. Robert had told me when I was hired that there was a strict zero-tolerance policy for phone use during shifts, but Robert was always playing that stupid game on his phone when things were slow, so I didn't really care anymore. I picked up my phone and started scrolling through Facebook, letting time slip by. Around 9 p.m., I began cleaning up the place, getting ready to close. It had been a quiet night since the rush ended. I turned up the music, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling still gnawing at me. Then, my phone dinged. I slid over to the coffee bar, expecting it to be Molly explaining why she was running late again. Probably some excuse about her mom or boyfriend. I flipped my phone over and froze. It was from Molly. Hey girl, I hate to do this, but my brother is sick and gave me the stomach bug. Can you cover my shift tonight? I'll bring you food next shift. I slammed my phone down in frustration. Great. Now I had to work until 3 a.m. I called Robert. He didn't pick up until the fifth ring. Hey Robert, Molly called out last minute. She wants me to cover her shift. Okay, he replied. So, can you come in so I can go home? Can't tonight. Have you tried Scott? I called Scott. He's only available for mornings. Well, extra hours, right? Good luck. I tried not to scream as he hung up. I wanted to leave, but I needed the extra hours. I hated it, but what choice did I have? The next few hours dragged on. I ground more coffee beans, stared at the clock, and thought about moving somewhere else, anywhere but here. The time seemed to stretch, but finally, it was midnight. I'd had enough. I decided to close early. Robert wouldn't know, and even if he did, I didn't care anymore. I started turning off the lights and packing up the pastries. I was almost done when I walked to the glass doors. The locks were a pain, these long metal bars that slid into holes in the floor. It was the only way to keep them locked tight without it looking trashy, but I hated it. As I kneeled down to lock it, something made me look up, and that's when I saw it. A deer, its face pressed against the glass, with two huge, vivid orange eyes staring straight at me. It wasn't just standing there. It was breathing, its body shifting slowly with each inhale. I froze. It felt off. The size was wrong, too big for a doe. I stepped back, but my eyes couldn't leave its face. After a long moment, I grabbed my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. The doe didn't blink, just stood there watching. Hey, it's Jenny from the coffee shop down by the state line, I said, my voice shaky. I've got something strange. A doe came up to the shop. Its eyes are super orange, and it's acting weird. It might be sick or something. You should come check it out. I didn't even finish the message before I saw it start to move, shuffling sideways, never taking its eyes off me. Something wasn't right. Its lips pulled back, revealing sharp, red teeth, almost too perfect. They looked like human teeth. I nearly dropped the phone. What the? I whispered. My body was frozen, but my mind was racing. I could hear my voice trembling as I finished the voicemail. Please hurry. I hung up quickly, my heart pounding. When I looked back, the deer had moved. It slid across the glass, its legs wobbling, but it was getting faster. And then, I noticed, its legs weren't right. They were way too long, and the fur around them had been singed off, revealing dark red skin. I didn't have time to think. I scrambled to lock the door as it neared, just inches away, but something felt wrong. I couldn't look away. And then, its hand, It was pressed between the glass doors. I froze, terror coursing through me. I pushed the glass doors as hard as I could, forcing them shut with all my strength. The lock clicked into place, and I collapsed to the floor. It didn't move. It just sat there, staring at me, its fingers wet with something dark. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. It didn't answer. Instead, it smiled. Those human teeth, twisted and unsettling, flashed in the dim light. I quickly locked the second door before it could reach it. We stared at each other through the glass, and I don't know how. Maybe it was exhaustion or fear, but I ended up drifting off, my head falling onto the coffee bar. I woke with a jolt, slamming my head into the marble. The deer was gone. I scanned the room, shaking, my heart slowing. The only sign it was there was a red smear across the glass. I took a deep breath. Maybe morning shift would clean it up. I couldn't do it. I sat there for another 15 minutes, scanning the night, still shaken. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced. I never did see that deer again. It was the middle of the night, and the only thing lighting up the parking lot was the neon blue glow coming from my car. My Ford was sitting all alone, but still no sign of the doe. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. It was now or never, and I knew I had to act fast. I quickly started making a plan. I'd keep my keys tightly gripped in my hand, just like they taught us at Walmart, you know. And I'd make a mad dash to my car. As soon as I got in, I'd lock the doors, start the engine, and drive like my life depended on it. I'd speed all the way home, and that would be that. It wasn't a big parking lot, maybe only 100 feet from the staff entrance to my car. I took a deep breath, looking around one last time to make sure no one was following me. Everything was quiet, nothing out of place. My phone screen was cracked, lines of pink and blue cutting through the display, making everything look blurry. I fumbled with it for a moment before dialing the sheriff's number again. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I hung up, sighing. Guess I was on my own. I checked my surroundings again. All clear. I made my move, walking toward the staff door behind the kitchen. I didn't hesitate. With my keys in hand, I swung it open and stepped outside. The air hit me, cold, still, and silent. My car was waiting across the lot, just under the trees. 100 more feet and I'd be safe, headed home to deal with whatever trauma this night would bring. I started walking faster, a little too fast, when I saw it. A tree near my car was swaying back and forth. The wind wasn't blowing. Not a leaf was rustling anywhere else, but the tree was moving like something was pushing it. My heart started to race. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. The figure was coming down the tree. The red, raw fingers appeared first, crawling down like it had no care for gravity. Then I saw the top of its head, glowing under the blue light, and I froze. Stitches ran down its back, as if someone had pieced it together. The sight made my stomach churn. It moved fast, too fast, climbing down face first, like it was born to do this. Before I could fully process it, the thing was already on all fours, standing on the grass right next to my car. I could see its eyes, bright orange and locked onto mine, unblinking. But it wasn't a doe anymore. Not really. It was like something between a person and a deer, its skin half fur, half charred flesh. Its face, it wasn't right. No lips, just raw skin stretched over teeth, too big for its mouth. I screamed before I even thought about it. I turned and bolted back toward the door of the store. I could hear it behind me, heavy and fast, moving like it was right on top of me. I flung myself inside and slammed the door shut. My hands gripped the handle so tightly I thought I might break it. I heard it outside, scratching at the door, trying to get in. But the worst part? It didn't make a sound. No grunting, no breathing. Just a quiet, relentless pressure, like it was hunting me. And then, right when I thought I couldn't handle it anymore, I heard it. "Hey, Jenny. Sorry I'm late. Had to stop and get gas. It was Molly. I blinked, confused. She was supposed to be at home. Why was she here? "Can you let me in?" she asked, sounding so off. Her voice was wrong, lower than usual, strained. That wasn't Molly. I knew it. My grip on the door loosened in my confusion, and in that split second, the door flew open. I scrambled back, my heart pounding in my chest. What stood before me wasn't Molly. It was tall, at least 6 feet, with a body so thin it looked like it might snap in half. Its skin was thin and stretched, almost paper-like, and I could see the blood dripping down from its unhinged jaw. The red liquid hit the floor in a slow, steady drip. I froze, unable to do anything except watch it move toward me. Then my survival instincts kicked in. My hand found the wasp spray, and I sprayed it at the thing, watching it stumble back in surprise. That was my chance. I ran, jumping over the coffee bar and frantically trying to unlock the glass door. The thing was faster than I could have imagined, slamming against the door with inhuman speed. The lock slipped from my trembling hands, but somehow, by sheer luck, I got it open. I slid through the door, slamming it shut behind me. I didn't look back, but I heard the glass shatter only inches from my back. I didn't stop running until I reached the Exxon station, the sound of my feet pounding against the pavement mixing with the distant echo of the thing still behind me. I ran straight to the small outdoor bathroom, always locked, but now the one place I felt safe. But just as my feet hit the road, I felt it. A tug on my shirt, strong hands pulling me back. "No, no, no, no." I cried out, my arms flailing forward as I tried to break free. My body screamed in pain as the thing's nails dug into me. I felt my own voice slip away, and that's when I realized it wasn't me. It was copying me. That's when I broke. I pushed forward, my legs shaking as I scrambled toward the highway. And then, just as it prepared to leap, a rush of air swept between us. I shut my eyes, and then it was gone. I opened my eyes just in time to see a truck screech to a stop, sending the thing flying yards away, straight into the woods. I heard a sickening crack as it slammed against a tree. How the truck missed me, I don't know, but I wasn't about to question it. The driver was frantic, eyes wide, and I quickly hopped into the back of his truck. I begged him to take me to the sheriff's office. After some convincing, he agreed. He'd been speeding down the road with no lights on, clearly high, and the last thing he expected was to hit a creature like that. The officers took it seriously enough to go into the woods, following the strange red trail left behind. But when they came back, they couldn't find anything. The DNA on the shirt I left behind didn't match anyone. The coffee shop had to close. I told Molly everything, and we both quit. Scott and Robert stayed, but it didn't take long for the whole town to find out. People came to ask me about it, but the police called it a rabid animal, a bear or maybe a wolf. But I knew the truth. They had no idea what really happened. I moved to Seattle soon after, leaving everything behind. I rented a small studio in the heart of the city, surrounded by people. I didn't take night shifts anymore, and I never drank a chai latte again. I keep a piece of my flannel in my wallet, stained red, as a reminder that I survived. I've told no one except my girlfriend. She's the only one who knows. She found me a therapist, but I don't talk much about the nightmares, just how I feel alone. Because no one would believe me. Every now and then, the sheriff calls. He checks up on me like he's worried. His voice, though, it's off. Lower, strained. The most recent time, I didn't pick up. And then there was a message. "Hey, Jenny, it's me again. Just wanted to check on you. Haven't seen you in a while. Take care." I listened to it again, then again. Something was wrong with his voice. It wasn't him. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like that? Something you can't explain. Most reports say they're pretty harmless, though just because they could rip you to pieces doesn't mean they want to. At least, that's what I told myself as I reached into the back seat and petted Brutus, who responded by licking my hand. Still, it's best to keep a distance. When I finished, Thea had a question. You mentioned crawlers, flesh gates. What are those? The sunlight was fading slowly, so I turned on the headlights before answering. Humanoids. Crawlers is a pretty broad term. Covers anything that's human-shaped but not quite right. Too tall, too thin, often missing facial features. Flesh gates are shapeshifters, kind of like skinwalkers, but without the ties to Native American culture. And yeah, those things are real, and they're out there. Kyle leaned a little closer to Brutus, concern on his face. Really? And you think those things could be here? I shrugged. Guess all those sightings can't come from nowhere. As for here, no idea. But don't worry too much about it. It's highly unlikely we'll see one. Kyle nodded, still looking a little uneasy. Olive, sitting next to me, placed her hand briefly on my shoulder. My heart skipped a beat, and I forced my eyes back on the road, trying not to blush. I barely heard her question over my own thoughts, but after a second, I registered her words. Is there anything paranormal that actually scares you? I took a deep breath before answering, remembering what Kyle had said. Obviously, I'd be terrified if I ever came across one of those freaky things. But just talking about them? Nah, not really. It got quiet after that. We drove a little further and soon we were deep in the woods, heading down an old trail. My car's wheels bumped over rocks, roots, and the occasional stream. By the time the sun had fully set, the air had that chill that made everything feel a little sharper. Out of nowhere, Kyle sat up straight. Do you hear that? I slammed on the brakes, eyes darting to where he was pointing. The bushes were moving, rustling. We all went silent. Olive leaned toward me, looking out my window, and her closeness pulled me out of focus for a moment. But when I turned back, the rustling was getting closer. The tension in the car thickened, and I noticed Kyle looking genuinely scared. Maybe I shouldn't have talked to them about cryptids after all. But before I could think too much, a deer sprang from the bushes, darting across the road in front of us. We all jumped back in surprise, but as soon as we saw it was just a deer, we all started laughing. Wow, Kyle, that was scary, Sam said, still making ghost noises. Thea and I joined in. Kyle rolled his eyes. Whatever, guys, you were just as scared as I was. Could have been a monster. No. Thea said, its eyes and legs were all in the right places. The only cryptid around here is Sam, and I think we're all stuck with him. I laughed and started the car again, but as I glanced in the rearview mirror, something caught my eye. Something moving fast across the road. My stomach dropped, and I tried to look closer, but when I blinked, it was gone. I shook it off as a trick of my mind, just another one of those moments where my anxiety messes with me. I've learned to push it aside. We kept chatting, and not long after, we reached the campsite. I pulled the tent from the trunk and pointed out where we should set it up. You four set up the tent, I said. Why don't you help? Kyle asked. I just drove 4 hours, Kyle. I think I can allocate the chores, I said, grinning. I'm useless at setting that thing up anyway. I turned to head into the tree line, but Sam stopped me. Where are you going? I'm going to get some wood and start the fire, I said, flicking on my flashlight as I moved into the woods. I picked up a few sticks, carefully inspecting them for any critters I didn't want to set on fire. As I flipped over one stick, a small spider crawled onto my hand. I smiled and gently placed it on the soft ground. There you go, sir, I whispered. When I stood up, something felt strange. The night seemed quieter. The cicadas were still chirping, but something about it seemed almost mechanical, like it wasn't natural. I listened for the usual nighttime noises, birds, possums, anything, but there was nothing. Weird, I thought. I hurried back to the campsite with the wood, and by the time I returned, the usual sounds of the forest had returned too, easing my nerves. The others had managed to set up the tent, and Brutus was already inside, snoring away like he had done something all day. I grabbed a matchbox from my bag, lit it, and started the fire. Okay, guys, start bringing over some logs to sit on, I called to my friends, gently coaxing the fire to grow. Once the fire was at a good size, I stood up and walked over to the car to grab Brutus's bed and some marshmallows. I dropped them next to the logs and called him over. He lazily climbed out of the tent, gave me a pat on the head, then flopped down on his bed with a heavy sigh. I grabbed a marshmallow and speared it on a stick before tossing the bag to Thea, who had sat beside me. We all settled around the fire, chatting and laughing. After a while, I reached down to check the time, but then remembered I had left my phone in the tent. "Hey, does anyone have the time?" I asked. Kyle froze, his hand still in his pocket, and slowly turned to me, looking sheepish. Cassie, what have you done?" Normally, he rolled his eyes at me, but this time his voice was slower, like he was trying not to get into trouble. "I think I left my phone when we stopped for a bathroom break," he admitted. "It was right after the deer encounter, about 10 minutes before we got here." I sighed. "Fine, I'll go check. But if I don't find it, I'm coming straight back." "Please, Cassie, it might rain, and I can't afford to replace it." I shook my head, mildly annoyed. "Can't you just check in the morning?" He bit his lip. "Come on, you know you're the one who has the long legs." I gave him a look. "It's not about that. It's about not wanting to get wet." Olive stood up. "I'll go with you." "Thanks," I said, trying to hide the relief in my voice. "Maybe we'll even see something cool, like a bird, huh?" she added, smiling. "Maybe." I grinned back, feeling my heart flutter a little. As we walked, I stayed alert, eyes scanning the trees for any signs of danger. Honestly, though, I wasn't worried about confrontation. I'm tall and built, and if things came to a fight, I'd be okay. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The path was muddy, and I slowed down to match Olive's pace. The night was eerily quiet, and I kept my flashlight ready, scanning the area. We came across a small stream, and I helped Olive cross it by reaching out my hand. She smiled at me with that smile that made my heart do strange things. "Thanks, Cassie," she said, her eyes soft. "No problem, ma'am," I joked, giving a little bow. We made it to the spot where Kyle's phone should have been, and I started sweeping my flashlight beam around, hoping to catch the glow of his obnoxiously pink case. Olive was on the other side of the road doing the same. Then her flashlight beam suddenly stopped. "Found it?" I asked, stepping closer. She shook her head slowly. "No, but I thought I saw something in the trees." I froze, feeling that cold sense of dread wash over me. "Let's go back," I said, trying to keep calm. "I don't think the phone's here anyways." She didn't argue, but I noticed her unease as she followed me back down the path. Then, without warning, the forest fell silent again. The cicadas were still chirping, but it sounded wrong, like a recording on loop. I picked up my pace, trying to usher Olive forward. She gave me a puzzled look, but I just whispered, "It's a bit cold. Let's hurry." We turned a corner, and suddenly, Olive stopped. Her breath hitched in her chest, and I could feel the dread crawling up my spine as I looked where she was staring. In the middle of the path, there was a body, broken, twisted. A deer, but not really. Something had torn it apart. It was barely recognizable. I felt a sick wave of nausea hit me, and the only thing I could say was, "I think it used to be a deer." It was the same deer I had seen earlier, the one I had thought was just running away. We were being stalked. Before I could process it, we crouched behind a bush just off the path, trying to keep our breathing as quiet as possible. I heard it stop right in front of us, just a few feet away. It sniffed the air, trying to catch our scent. I silently prayed, just hoping, really, that it wouldn't find us. To my horror, the sniffing grew closer, and then it stopped, right on top of us. "Found it," the voice hissed. It sounded almost casual, the same as when I'd asked Olive if she'd found her phone earlier. But now I knew the meaning had changed. This time it was saying it had found us. For a moment, there was complete silence, except for my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Olive softly sobbing, her face pressed against my shoulder. There was nothing. No sound of it moving, No fake cicada noises trying to trick us again. It was just still. And then, without warning, it leaped over the bush and landed right in front of us. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I saw it for the first time in its full, disgusting form. Its arms and legs were too long, too thin, bent like some kind of insect. Even on all fours, it was 5 feet tall, at least. I saw its ribs shift under its pale skin as it took a breath. Its veins were bulging, throbbing with every beat of that unnatural heart. It tilted its head, bones cracking as its neck bent in ways that didn't seem possible. In its mouth, it clutched the severed antler of a deer, caught between rows of jagged, mismatched teeth, some of which looked like they didn't belong to anything animal at all. They looked human. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I realized the teeth weren't just random. They were human teeth, old ones, worn down, mixed in with the sharp animal fangs. Its tongue hung out from its mouth, thick and slick, like something that shouldn't be able to exist. I tried to avoid its eyes for as long as I could, but eventually they locked onto mine. And once they did, I couldn't look away. They were human eyes, out of place on that pale, expressionless face, and they were worse than any blackened, hollow sockets I had ever heard about. In that moment, I knew it was the end. I wrapped my arms around Olive for a second, trying to comfort her, before standing up. She tried to pull me back down, but I didn't have time to argue. I forced my legs to hold me steady, even though they were shaking. I pulled out my knife, keeping it hidden at my side. "Run," I whispered to Olive. She hesitated, her fear obvious, but after a long moment, she nodded and sprinted off. The creature jolted as if to chase after her, but I held its gaze, and it slowly turned back to me. It crept closer, sniffing at the air, and the deer antler clattered to the ground, making a sickening sound. It was right there now, close enough for me to smell the rot on. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was about 10 years old, we moved from one haunted house to another. This story takes place in the second one. A little background on the house. It used to be a hotel where travelers would stay after arriving by rail before heading to the Waitomo Caves via horse and cart. Over time, as transportation evolved, the hotel became obsolete. It was split into 2 parts, and the section we lived in, about 2/3 of the original structure, was moved a couple of kilometers down the road and converted into a house. The house I grew up in had its fair share of paranormal activity. It was haunted by multiple entities, some friendly, some neutral, and others that gave my family and me an uneasy feeling. One presence in particular stood out. It wasn't frightening or threatening. It seemed more curious than anything else. Our living area was a large room, with a fireplace and TV on one end and the dining area on the other. We had divided the space by placing a couch and chair in the middle of the room. One evening, when I was alone watching TV, I felt someone step up behind me. It was a familiar sensation. My dad often paused behind the chair to see what I was watching. Without looking, I said, "Yeah, nothing's on," and started flicking through channels for him. When he didn't respond, I turned around, only to find no one there. Embarrassed, I laughed to myself, realizing I'd been talking to thin air. Years later, after I'd moved out, I returned home for a weekend visit. As I sat watching TV, I felt that same sensation, a figure stepping up behind me to see what was on. I casually mentioned that I was watching the only decent show and turned to see what my dad was up to. But once again, there was no one there. This time, I wasn't surprised. In fact, I found it amusing. By now, I'd come to recognize the ghost's habit, and it felt oddly comforting, like a friendly, "What are you watching?" from someone who meant no harm. The last time this happened was in late 2007. I was visiting my parents for a few days. After they'd gone to bed, I stayed up in the living room, enjoying the quiet. As I watched TV, I felt the familiar presence step up behind me. By this point, I didn't even bother turning around. I just smiled, said hi, and kept watching. When I was 17, I went through a tough time. Due to a massive family drama, I had no contact with my family and was forced to move out on my own. Starting from scratch, I had to look after myself completely. It was a lonely time. While I support myself, my friends were still in school. One of my first challenges was finding a place to live. I found a room for rent in an old house in a well-established area. On first inspection, it seemed perfect. Affordable, spacious, and shared with two decent-seeming flatmates. The house was 2 stories, with a kitchen, bathroom, and living room downstairs, and a large bedroom upstairs where I'd stay. Excited to have found a place, I moved in quickly. Almost immediately, odd things began happening. At first, I didn't think much of it. 2 days after moving in, I became sick. Extremely sick. Despite multiple doctor visits and medication, I couldn't shake it. I blamed the house. It was freezing, and I figured it had poor insulation. I'd pile 8 blankets on my bed just to sleep, and would sometimes wake up in the night seeing my breath in the air. This was during spring in Auckland, so it shouldn't have been that cold. Each morning I'd wake to find water running down the walls. My mirror would be fogged up, and at first I thought it was just condensation, but I soon noticed the rest of the house was fine. No water, no chill. Still, I ignored it and carried on. One strange thing I couldn't ignore was the feeling I got late at night. After nights out with a friend, I'd return home to an eerie sensation as I entered the house. The lounge, which I had to pass through to reach the stairs, always felt oppressive, like someone was watching me. I'd hurry to my room, avoiding the downstairs area entirely if I could. I figured it was paranoia from feeling so isolated, but the uneasiness lingered. Things escalated when a school friend came to stay the night. After dinner and a movie, we started getting ready for bed. She went to the bathroom to remove her contact lenses while I went upstairs. A few minutes later, she burst into my room, visibly shaken. She claimed she had seen a black dog walk past the bathroom door. There were no pets in the house. My flatmate was allergic to cats and dogs. I dismissed it, saying her vision might have been off after removing one contact, but she was insistent, and to this day, she swears she saw it. Other minor incidents followed. I tried decorating my room with posters, but no matter how many times I secured them, they'd end up scattered on my bed by morning. Eventually, I gave up and took them down. One night, my flatmates were both out. One was working a night shift, and the other had recently moved out. Alone in the house, I decided to go to bed early. Exhausted from working long hours, I fell asleep quickly. Then I had a dream, or at least, I think it was a dream. In the dream, I was in bed, lying exactly as I had been when I fell asleep. I sensed someone standing in my doorway. I didn't recognize him. He was a complete stranger. Too afraid to move, I watched as he entered the room and walked to my dressing table. He picked up a photo of my dad that I kept tucked into the mirror frame. It was one of the few connections I had to my family. In the dream, I gasped, sitting up suddenly. The man spun around, dropped the photo, and disappeared. I woke up feeling uneasy but brushed it off as just a dream. However, when I got ready for work the next morning, I noticed the photo wasn't in its usual place. I found it on the floor, at least a meter away from the dresser. With the windows always closed due to the cold, there was no way it could have been blown off. A month later, I moved out of the house. Strangely, within 2 days of leaving, I was no longer sick. Whatever had plagued me disappeared completely. Since then, I haven't experienced anything remotely similar, but I still think about that house. I wonder who the man in my dream was and whether the house was haunted. It's been 5 years, but the memory of that night remains vivid, like it happened yesterday. I've never been someone who gets scared easily. When I was 13, my family moved from Fiji to New Zealand. We didn't have much money at first, so we stayed with my aunt for almost a year. Eventually, my dad secured a stable job, and we rented a small, old two-bedroom house not far from my aunt's place. My mom was thrilled to finally have a home of our own. At the time, she couldn't work because my little sister was only 2 and childcare was too expensive. So during the day, my dad and I were out for work and school while Mom stayed home with my sister. The house itself was far from perfect. It was old, moldy, and poorly insulated. Winters were brutal. With temperatures dropping below freezing, we had little to no heating, and the house was always uncomfortably cold. Sometimes we'd feel icy patches in strange places like spots of sunlight that should have been warm or even in the kitchen, while the gas stove flames burned visibly. At first, we chalked it up to the house being in bad condition, but soon things got stranger. Small items began disappearing and never turned up again. Mom, who wasn't superstitious, started feeling uneasy after spending so much time alone in the house. My dad, always the logical one, dismissed her worries as paranoia. For a while, we believed him. It was easier to explain things away than to confront the growing sense of dread. But the uneasiness grew. One night, I stayed up late to finish a school assignment. It was close to 1 a.m. and everyone else was asleep. I could hear my parents snoring and my sister was sleeping in my bed. Suddenly, I heard voices coming from the living room. It sounded like a man and a woman having a heated argument. The voices were so loud and clear that I thought my parents were awake, so I got up to check. But when I opened my door, the living room was dark and silent. No one was there. Confused, I checked the windows, thinking the sound might have come from outside, but the street was empty. Spooked, I hurried back to my room. The following night, my little sister woke up crying for her bottle. I decided to make it for her without disturbing Mom. As I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light, I heard footsteps behind me. Thinking it was Mom, I turned to tell her I was making the bottle, but what I saw nearly made me drop the milk. A dark, shadowy figure loomed near the kitchen entrance. It had the outline of a person, but there were no features, just a black silhouette. The room was freezing, even though it was summer, and I was in just a nightshirt. Terrified, I began reciting verses from my prayers, and after what felt like an eternity, the figure vanished. I ran back to my room, too scared to tell anyone. The next morning, during breakfast, my dad asked if I'd come into their room during the night. I shook my head, confused. He insisted he'd seen a shadowy figure at the foot of their bed around 2 a.m. That was about the same time I'd been in the kitchen. The realization sent chills down my spine. After that, the house felt heavier, darker. My normally sweet-tempered sister became irritable, crying at odd hours. My parents started arguing more, and I fell into a constant state of gloom. The entity, whatever it was, stopped trying to hide. Shadowy figures would appear frequently. Voices echoed in the living room, and sometimes we hear children crying. At night, there were thudding sounds on the steel roof, as if someone was walking slowly and deliberately above us. It wasn't cats. They avoided the house altogether. Even the neighbor's dog, usually friendly, growled whenever we were in our yard. 7 months after moving in, Mom had enough. One afternoon, after putting my sister to sleep, she went to the bathroom and heard what sounded like a child crying. Then she heard tiny footsteps running into the bathroom behind her. Assuming my sister had woken up, Mom turned to comfort her, but no one was there. She found my sister still fast asleep. That was the breaking point. Mom begged Dad to find a new house, and 8 months later we moved out. As soon as we left, things changed. My sister stopped crying for no reason, my parents stopped fighting, and I felt like myself again. Whatever haunted that house didn't follow us, and for that, I'm grateful. The house was later deemed unfit for living and demolished, but I still wonder what or who was there with us. Although I come from a spiritually inclined family, I haven't had many personal experiences, at least not until recently. My great-grandmother was a spiritualist, my grandmother a firm believer, and my mother has had countless encounters with the supernatural. Some were uplifting, but others were terrifying. One of the more extreme events left her injured after being pushed down the stairs by an unseen force, prompting us to move out of our home when I was 10. That event opened my eyes to the spiritual world, but my personal encounters were minimal. I'd sensed presences before, mostly comforting ones, and often thought it might be my grandfather who passed away before I was born. Despite never meeting him, I've always felt a connection, finding solace in the idea that he might be watching over me during difficult times. 2 years ago, I lost my grandmother to heart disease. It was a tough time, but I found peace imagining her reunited with my grandfather, smiling down on our family. Up until recently, these comforting thoughts defined my relationship with the spiritual world, but since moving into my current house, my experiences have become far more tangible. On November 1st, 2009, I moved in with a close friend who had recently separated from his wife. The house was old, dark, and had a musty smell that clung to the air. My friend hated it so much that he'd been staying elsewhere, leaving the house almost abandoned. Determined to brighten things up, I moved in with my furniture, cleaned, and brought life back to the space. My friend remarked on how much lighter the house felt after my efforts. Sadly, that change didn't last. As I spent more time alone in the house, I began feeling uneasy. At first, I blamed the unfamiliar environment. My flatmate, a fireman, often worked night shifts, leaving me by myself. I didn't mind the solitude until things started happening. 2 weeks after moving in, I was settling into bed when I heard heavy footsteps running down the hall toward my room. The sounds stopped right outside my door. Frozen, I grabbed an old Spanish sword I happened to own and listened. Hearing nothing, I cautiously opened the door. No one was there. I tried to shake it off, but moments later I heard the sliding window in my flatmate's room open and then slam shut. I ran to check, but the window was locked. Baffled and terrified, I slept with the sword in my hand that night. From that point, the nights grew stranger. I began waking up at exactly 5 a.m. every morning, often feeling as though someone was calling my name. I'd look around, but nothing was there. The cat we'd recently adopted started acting oddly, staring at empty spaces as though threatened. Sometimes it would run down the hall as if chasing something, or being chased. At other times it stared at me in fear before bolting, moments after purring contentedly on my lap. Then there were the prayer flags. As part of my Buddhist practice, I'd hung them in the hallway. Yet on multiple mornings, I'd find them gone, sometimes in the backyard, sometimes near my car in the driveway. I secured them tightly, testing the knots, but they still disappeared. Eventually, I never saw them again. On January 2, 2010, things escalated. Returning late after New Year's celebrations, I immediately felt uneasy. The house was hot and stifling, even though no heaters were on. The hallway, however, was icy cold. I settled in for the night, hoping to shake the feeling. But around 12:30 a.m., the footsteps returned, heavy, deliberate, running from the lounge down the hall into my flatmate's room. The cat was still in the lounge, ruling it out as the source. Worse, I had closed all the doors, yet the footsteps continued as if passing straight through them. The next morning, I discovered the prayer flags were gone for good. Disturbed, I started investigating. A Google search of my address led me to an article about a man named William James Clutterbuck, who had lived in the house with his family. William had died of a heart attack in the hallway in October 1939. His great-nephew, whom I contacted, confirmed this and shared that William had been mild-mannered and kind. This brought some comfort, but I also learned that William's grandson, also named William, had tragically committed suicide in 1997 at the age of 27, the same age I am now. This connection felt personal. I had moved into this house seeking a fresh start after a difficult period. I'd been supporting a suicidal friend and navigating the end of a challenging relationship. Was William aware of my struggles? Did he call my name to offer comfort, or was it just coincidence? I don't feel like William means to harm me, but his presence is undeniable. The footsteps, the moving objects, the cold patches and the flickering lights all point to something trying to make itself known. Strangely, I've also found moments of comfort, like when a lamp inherited from my grandmother flickered while I read, as if she were watching over me. Should I bless the house, replace the prayer flags, or simply embrace these experiences as part of my spiritual journey? For now, I'm left with more questions than answers. I've had sleep paralysis before, many years ago when I was younger, but I couldn't recall much about it, just the feeling. However, in the last 2 months, I've had 2 very vivid experiences that brought those memories flooding back. I'm a 25-year-old man living in Rotorua, New Zealand. For the past 3 months, I've been living alone in a house I've owned for about 4 years. Both experiences happened while I was home alone. The first incident occurred on a rainy night. I went to bed as usual and had a vivid dream. In the dream, I was outside my house with a friend, about to walk down the alleyway across the street from my room. My friend went ahead, and as I was about to follow, I suddenly lost all energy. I collapsed at the entrance of the alley and felt myself fading, everything turning black. Then in the dream, I felt as though I was spiraling downward in complete darkness. The sensation continued until I fell into my bed, and that's when I woke up, completely paralyzed. This wasn't the typical pressure on the chest paralysis you often hear about. Instead, I felt a distinct presence in the room. After some effort, I managed to break free from the paralysis and sat up, instinctively looking toward the alleyway I had dreamed about. I can't explain why, maybe because the dream had felt so real. When I glanced back into my room, I noticed something unusual, a circular, colored light orb floating in the corner. I watched, frozen as it moved closer and closer until it seemed to float directly into me. The moment it made contact, I was paralyzed again. This time, I was half sitting up, completely unable to move. I could still see my surroundings, including the window, but my body refused to respond. Freaked out, I struggled to speak, finally managing to whisper, "Get away from me." Shortly after, the paralysis lifted. As I regained control, I noticed what looked like smoke swirling upward toward the ceiling. It eventually dissipated, and I managed to go back to sleep, though uneasily. This experience made me reflect on something that had happened earlier that day. I'd had a wild night out, drinking heavily at a strip club, and ended up going home with an older woman I wouldn't normally associate with. I felt ashamed about it afterward. It was completely out of character for me. Part of me wondered if I'd invited some sort of negative energy or spirit into my life by engaging in something I knew I shouldn't have. The second experience happened 2 weeks later. I'd spent the afternoon at home, listening to music on YouTube and downloading tracks. That day, I stumbled upon a dark genre of hip-hop called horrorcore. I downloaded a mixtape that was particularly disturbing and demonic. Not my usual taste, but I've been curious. That night, I went to bed early. I don't remember dreaming, but I woke up paralyzed, lying on my side. Just before waking, I had a similar sensation to the first incident, the spiraling, falling feeling. This time, it felt like my bed was shaking violently, as though in an earthquake, and I was about to be tipped out. But when I fully woke up, I hadn't moved at all. Breaking free from the paralysis was a struggle. I focused on moving my fingers, but even that took immense effort. My hips felt like they were spasming, and I sensed an unsettling, negative presence in the room. I thought I saw faint smoke again, but it wasn't as obvious as during the first experience. I got up, turned on the light, and checked the room. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. Too scared to go back to sleep, I turned on the TV to distract myself. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think about the music I'd listened to earlier. had I unintentionally attracted or invited something into my home? Both experiences left me shaken and questioning. Could these events have been purely sleep paralysis, or was there more to them? The vividness of the dreams, the orb, the smoke, and the overwhelming sense of a presence made them feel more than just a physical phenomenon. I can't help but wonder if my actions, listening to dark music or engaging in behavior I later regretted, might have opened some door I didn't mean to. I haven't had any further experiences since, but I still feel uneasy at night, particularly when alone. I'm trying to make sense of it all and figure out whether it was something spiritual, psychological, or a combination of both. My name is Amanda and I'm 17 years old. When I was younger, around 7 or 8, I often experienced strange things in my house. Whenever I was home alone, I would hear footsteps upstairs. It terrified me because it felt like someone was in the house. I'd also hear whispers or movements coming from the walls. At the time, I didn't know what to think. My parents always reassured me, saying I was imagining things, or that the noises were coming from the neighbors since their house was attached to ours. These incidents happened in Scotland, where I was born and lived for 13 years before moving to New Zealand. After the move, I didn't think about those experiences much until something strange happened about 6 months ago. It was a Wednesday morning, and I was home alone, getting ready for university. I was drying my hair when a CE, which had been sitting flat on top of my TV, suddenly flew off and hit me. It didn't leave a mark, but it hit me with enough force to feel deliberate. I immediately checked to see if the hair dryer might have caused it, but it didn't make sense. The CD had been lying flat, not hanging off the edge, and the TV was a good couple of meters away. There was no way it could have fallen naturally and hit me with that kind of force. The experience unsettled me, but I tried to brush it off. Then, exactly a week later, also on a Wednesday morning while I was home alone, something else happened. I was straightening my hair and listening to music when one of my Winnie the Pooh teddies from when I was little fell off the TV. It was the same TV the CD had come from. There were no open windows or draughts in the room. Everything was still. At this point, I started connecting the dots. These things only ever happened when I was alone. I shared what I'd experienced with my parents and friends, but they thought I was imagining it or overreacting. It frustrated me because I knew what I saw, and I couldn't explain it logically. A few months before these events, something else odd happened. My dog started barking loudly in the hallway. She barks often, so at first I didn't think much of it. But this time she seemed particularly distressed. She stood at the end of the hallway, barking at something at the opposite end, completely focused. When I looked, there was nothing there. No windows for her to see someone outside. No sounds or movements to explain her reaction. She wouldn't stop barking though, which unnerved me. I've heard that dogs can sense or see spirits, and this made me wonder if that was what she was reacting to. Reflecting on all these incidents, I can't help but wonder, could there be a ghost in my house? Or am I reading too much into these events? The timing, the objects moving without explanation, and my dog's behavior all feel connected somehow. But without clear answers, it's hard to say. What do you think? Could these experiences point to something paranormal, or am I just overthinking it all? This is an experience my roommate had in our paying guest, PG apartment. In my earlier post, Encounter with Burnt Child, I mentioned that I had come to Hyderabad for an interview. Before this, I was working in an IT company in Pune. After graduating, I had recently joined this company and was temporarily staying in this PG accommodation since my hometown was elsewhere. My roommate, Deepti, name changed, and I lived in the same room. At that time, most of us didn't have mobile phones. Deepti had a boyfriend in Mumbai, and she used to call him daily from a nearby STD booth, usually in the evenings after returning from work. Sometimes these calls would stretch until late at night. To explain the setup, As soon as you step out of the PG, you take a right turn, another right, and yet another right to reach the main road. The STD booth was located there, just opposite and parallel to the PG. To get there, you'd have to take a U-turn along a road that passed by a boundary wall. On the other side of that wall were tall, dense trees spread across a plot of land. What happened next still gives me chills. It was around Diwali, and I had gone home on a 15-day leave. When I returned, I found my room empty. I assumed Deepti had gone to Mumbai, as she often did on weekends. Curious, I asked the PG owner, Auntie, about Deepti. She hesitated and said something strange had happened to her, but she was too tired to explain. She suggested I ask the other girls staying in the PG for details. Later that evening, when most of the girls had returned, I approached them to find out what had happened. What they told me left me completely shaken. One night, Deepti was returning from the STD booth after talking to her boyfriend. It was around 11:30 p.m., a pitch-dark night with no moon, Amavasia. As she was taking the U-turn near the wall, she suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs. It was as if something had leaped at her from the trees above. Her scream was so loud that people inside their houses and everyone in the PG heard it. The auntie and other girls rushed out to see what was going on. They found Deepti lying on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably and shaking with fear. They took her inside the PG, where she somehow managed to sleep. The next morning, the girls called Deepti's mother, who came to take her back to Mumbai. Everyone speculated that whatever attacked her had chosen the perfect timing, almost midnight on an Amavasia. The girls also mentioned that one of them had visited Deepti in Mumbai the previous weekend just to check on her. She told them that Deepti's condition had worsened. She would sit silently in a corner one moment and then suddenly start crying, pointing at an empty space, saying, "There he is. Can't you see him?" Hearing this, I was terrified. That night, I had to sleep alone in the room. My bed was right by the window, and I couldn't stop thinking, what if that thing comes in through the window? I stayed awake most of the night, chanting prayers to keep myself calm. I moved out of the PG shortly afterward, as I had already planned to shift to a flat. After moving, I lost touch with the PG auntie and the other girls. I didn't hear anything about Deepti until one day when I ran into one of the girls from the PG in the market. She told me that Deepti had returned to Mumbai, recovered, and seemed to have moved past the incident. Even now, I don't know what attacked Deepti that night, but I'm certain its intentions were far from good. In early 2009, I changed jobs and joined a company headquartered in Bangalore, India. Though I was based in Pune, I was called to Bangalore for a 5-day induction session and meetings with senior management. Upon arrival, I learned that 8 others had joined the organization around the same time as me, and we were all staying at the company's guest house near the office. The induction sessions ran from 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., leaving us with plenty of free time in the evenings to bond and get to know each other. Out of the 8, I grew particularly close to 3 colleagues, Ajay, Shailesh, and Navin. Ajay, a lively Punjabi from northern India, loved challenges and was always full of energy. Shailesh from Mumbai was quick-witted but mostly quiet. Navin, a Bangalore local, had a great sense of humor and entertained us with his sharp one-liners. The 4 of us got along like a house on fire. One evening, during a casual conversation, Navin mentioned that there was a graveyard near the guest house. He said the housekeeper, Shri, had warned him about strange happenings there and advised us to avoid the area at night. The road leading to the graveyard was desolate and generally avoided by locals. While Navin's story intrigued us, Ajay, a staunch skeptic, dismissed it as nonsense. Since Navin didn't know much more and Shri refused to elaborate, we let the topic drop. On our final evening in Bangalore, after our induction concluded, the company treated us to a grand dinner at a nearby hotel. Ajay enjoyed himself a little too much, having one drink too many. Back at the guest house as we packed our bags for the next morning's departure, the topic of the graveyard came up again. Frustrated by Ajay's constant scoffing, Navin dared him to spend an hour alone at the graveyard. Fueled by alcohol and bravado, Ajay immediately accepted and started heading out. Despite our protests, Ajay wouldn't listen. Reluctantly, I decided to go with him to make sure he stayed out of trouble. The graveyard was about a kilometer from the guest house down a deserted road. By the time we reached the entrance, it was 12:30 a.m. The cemetery was old and rarely used, with an eerie, nostalgic air about it. The winter night in Bangalore was especially cold, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. As we approached the gate, an old man introduced himself as the security guard, calling himself Awaken. Suspicious of our visit at such an odd hour, he asked why we were there. Ajay, still tipsy, quickly lied that he wanted to visit a relative's grave before leaving for London the next morning. Sympathetic, Awaken allowed us inside, urging us to be quick. The cemetery was quiet, except for the occasional howling of stray dogs. Graves lay on either side of a cemented path that led deeper into the grounds. Ajay insisted on sitting on a bench for a while, enjoying the solitude despite my unease. He lit a cigarette, ignoring my protests about respecting the sanctity of the place. After some time, Ajay decided to explore further. As we walked, he suddenly announced he needed to pee and headed into the nearby bushes, ignoring my warnings. While he was out of sight, I began feeling weak and breathless, as though someone were squeezing the life out of me. Dropping to my knees, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure moving ahead. It paused briefly, as if to look back at me, before disappearing. Panicked, I called out to Ajay, but got no response. I forced myself to move toward the bushes, where I found him lying unconscious. Shaking him vigorously, I managed to wake him. Dazed, Ajay recounted hearing movement behind him and feeling a sharp blow to his back before passing out. He was still in pain, and when I later checked, there was a clear imprint of 5 fingers on his back. The area bruised and blue. We hurried to leave, but were stopped at the gate by a young man who identified himself as the cemetery's only guard. When we mentioned Abu Chaka, his expression changed. He told us he'd been the sole guard for the past 5 years, but had heard occasional reports of an old man seen around the cemetery at night. This revelation was too much for Ajay, who fainted on the spot. We carried him to the guard's cabin and called our colleagues to pick us up. By the time we returned to the guest house, it was nearly 3:30 a.m. Shri, our caretaker, was furious upon hearing the story and berated us for our recklessness, calling us lucky to have escaped with our lives. Ajay was down with a high fever for several days and had to stay back in Bangalore. When I met him months later, he seemed more subdued and was wearing a tavis, a protective amulet given to him by a priest back home. As for me, I vowed never to engage in such foolhardy adventures again. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Although I witnessed the following incident firsthand, I wasn't the one driving it. For me, it was more of an experiment, and I had already decided to remain a spectator with an open mind. That's exactly what I did. My senior colleague and friend, Zoyanal, was an active member of an amateur paranormal forum we formed to discuss and explore the unknown. He was a strong-willed individual with firm beliefs, paying little attention to others' opinions. One of his theories was that every past conversation, event, or scene remains alive in some form. According to him, these impressions fade only when most of the souls involved in the event are reborn. The waiting period for each soul varies, so some scenes can remain intact for seconds or thousands of years. Zoyanal believed that the emotional intensity of an event creates an aura that can be accessed through specific mantric techniques and chants. The stronger the aura, the easier it is to witness the scene. In the case of tragedies or violent incidents, the aura can be so powerful that the scenes reconstruct themselves without any invocation, what we commonly refer to as hauntings. While I found his theories fascinating, I didn't fully agree. Still, I was curious about his extensive knowledge of chance and his ability to recreate past scenes. After some persuasion, he allowed me to witness one of his experiments. He preferred conducting these sessions at his ancestral home in northern Gaul, where the old and responsive environment made his efforts more effective. However, due to time constraints, we decided to do it at his house in Poon on a weekend. When I arrived at his place on Friday night, I found his study dimly lit, save for a small red bowl wrapped in a towel to soften its glow. A shiny brass plate sat on the floor, with one half coated in a thick black material. Zoyanal carried a small stack containing everything he needed for the session. He began by drawing a rectangle on the floor with white chalk, slightly larger than the brass plate, and placed the plate in its center. From his sack, he pulled out flower balls, pressing them onto the black coated side of the plate. He then drew symbols around the rectangle with a piece of coal, placed 4 lemons at the corners, and inserted pins into each. After applying vermilion to both our foreheads, he scattered the remaining powder into the air. Satisfied with the setup, he sat cross-legged outside the rectangle and opened a notebook of chants. Before starting, he instructed me to focus solely on the uncovered half of the plate, no matter what happened around me. When I peered at the shiny surface, I could see my reflection clearly. He began chanting, his voice a mix of Sanskrit and another language I couldn't identify. Occasionally, he lit candles, some of which burned while others didn't. At first, nothing happened. Then, I began to sense a faint charge in the air, accompanied by distant, indistinct chatter. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the plate as instructed. As the atmosphere grew heavier, I noticed that Zoyanal had entered a trance-like state, reciting chants from memory while scattering black powder over his head. The room felt colder, and the charged air seemed to pull at my focus. Suddenly, the scene appeared. It was as if someone had switched on a television. A strong smell of fried fish filled the room as the brass plate displayed a vivid image. I saw an old Primus stove with a small tank and a half-burnt aluminum pot on top, likely cooking rice. Beside it was a plate of fried fish, probably a cheap river variety. The room looked like it belonged to a lower middle-class family from about 50 years ago, judging by the furniture and the Hindi songs playing on a radio in the background. A middle-aged woman, wearing a simple sari and no jewelry, sat on the ground near the stove, speaking to someone I couldn't see. From her tone, I guessed the unseen person was another woman of her age. They were discussing a recent family wedding, praising how well it went and how pleased the guests were. For a while, the conversation remained uneventful. Then I heard a loud crash followed by a thud, as if someone had fallen. The woman I could see immediately stood up and rushed out of view. Angry voices and moans followed. Suddenly, the sound of coughing broke my focus. It was coming from Zoyanal, whose face had turned red as he struggled to continue chanting. He gestured for me to relax and close my eyes. Reluctantly, I complied. The room gradually returned to normal. When I opened my eyes, the scene on the plate had disappeared, leaving only my reflection. The charged air had cleared and the coldness faded. Exhausted, Zoyanal drank deeply from a jug of water, too drained to discuss the session. Later, he explained that the house we saw in the vision likely stood where his current apartment building now stands. Decades ago, the area housed workers from nearby garment factories who lived in makeshift homes. While we couldn't determine why this particular scene had appeared, Zoyanal speculated that the woman who fell might have sustained serious injuries, leaving an emotional imprint. For me, the experience was both fascinating and puzzling. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When my mother was in college, she lost her father, my grandfather. His untimely death left my grandmother, Mom, and her 3 siblings in a tough situation. They faced financial struggles, but worse, they were surrounded by enemies trying to take advantage of the situation. My grandfather's brother Vijay was one of the main tormentors. There were ongoing property disputes, and as per Indian laws, if anything happened to my grandmother and her children, the property would go to Vijay. This will be important later in the story. On the night of the incident, it was Diwali, the festival of lights. The night sky was lit with the occasional streaks of firecrackers and the loud pops of celebration. My grandmother and her 3 children were fast asleep in a bedroom. The bed was placed against a wall, right below a window with open grills. They were sleeping under a nylon mosquito net to ward off mosquitoes, as is common in India. In the adjoining room, my mother was studying by lantern light. She didn't turn on the room lights to avoid disturbing the others. Late into the night, she felt drowsy and soon dozed off. That's when she had a disturbing dream. She saw a square glass room engulfed in flames. Inside, she could faintly see people struggling to escape, but eventually, all went silent, leaving only the vision of the burning room. The dream startled her awake, but she brushed it off, thinking it was just a dream. However, a few minutes later, she felt the same drowsiness and fell asleep again. This time, she dreamt of a figure standing near the burning room. She heard a faint voice telling her, "Why are you sitting here in the dark? Go to the room full of light." The voice sounded familiar, and after a moment, she realized it was her father's voice. It was distinct, slightly rough, and unmistakable. Though startled, she dismissed it again. The dream came a 3rd time. This time, she clearly saw her father smiling at her and beckoning her toward the other room where her family was sleeping. Fireworks seemed to sparkle around him. Then slowly, the vision faded, and she woke up again, feeling a deep unease. Something felt wrong, as if danger was near. Unsure of what to do, she acted on impulse and went to check on the others. In the bedroom, everything seemed normal. Her grandmother and siblings were sleeping peacefully. Feeling relieved, she turned to leave, but suddenly heard a swishing sound. Startled, she turned back and saw a firecracker. A chuchubazi, a type of firework that spins and jumps when lit, fly past the window grills, missing them by inches. She thought it was an accident, as it was common for fireworks to stray on Diwali night. Then another chuchubazi flew past the window. This time, she found it odd. Why were so many firecrackers heading toward this particular window? She stood by the window, watching, and to her horror, saw 2 more firecrackers fly past, one of them nearly slipping through the window grills. A sudden realization struck her. Something was wrong. She looked out the window and saw Vijay standing on the roof of his house nearby. He had a packet of firecrackers and was deliberately lighting and throwing them toward the window. She watched as Vijay lit another firecracker, threw it directly toward the window. That's when it hit her. Vijay was trying to harm her family. The window was directly above the bed where they were sleeping. If a firecracker landed on the nylon mosquito net, it would catch fire instantly, engulfing the entire bed. Vijay was banking on the fact that everyone was fast asleep and wouldn't realize what was happening until it was too late. Terrified, my mother shouted for her grandmother and siblings to wake up immediately. They woke in panic and followed her to the window where they all saw Vijay on the roof. Startled by the commotion, he dropped his packet of firecrackers and fled down the stairs. Once the situation calmed down, my mother explained what had happened. Vijay had been trying to make it look like an accidental fire so he could claim the property. If my mother hadn't woken up and acted in time, the consequences could have been tragic. As she recounted the events to her family, she remembered the dream, her father's voice urging her to go to the other room, and the vision of a room on fire. Was it a warning from the divine? When I was a little girl, my parents would sometimes go out or leave town, and my brother and I would stay with Grandma. She had one of those cozy, welcoming houses that grandparents are known for. But there was one room at the back of her house, tucked away from the rest of the home. It was located just behind the laundry hall and garage, next to a small bathroom. That room was always cold, much colder than any other part of the house. I remember how much I hated that room. If I happened to fall asleep in the living room, I always hoped Grandma would let me stay there, but it never happened. Every time, she'd send me to that cold back room. There were many nights when I would have a strange dream within a dream. It's hard to explain, but I would wake up and see this woman dressed in 19th century clothes. Her dress had a bustle, and she wore a high collar. Her dark hair was tied up in a thick, tight bun, and her features were soft, though I could never make them out clearly. Sometimes I would wake up and see her walking past my door, as though she was coming from the bathroom. She would be humming a soft tune. Other times, I would wake and find her standing at the foot of my bed, looking at me as if I were her precious child. I wasn't scared of her, but I always felt a little uneasy. I remember one night waking up to find her standing right above me. I just pulled the covers over my head and rolled over, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. I didn't tell anyone about these experiences until I was in high school. Around 1992, I think. There had been a blackout in town, and I went up to my Aunt Nancy's house, which was way up in the woods. We were talking, and it seemed fun to share stories about places we wouldn't want to be during a storm or a blackout. I mentioned that I didn't like staying in the back room at Grandma's house. When Aunt Nancy asked why, I told her. She looked at me with a strange expression. It turned out that after my great-grandfather passed away, my other aunt, Teresa, and her daughter, my cousin Andrea, had stayed in that same room. Both of them had the same strange dream about the same woman. Nancy then asked me to describe what the woman looked like. When I did, she told me that she too had seen the same woman and had the same dream. My Aunt Teresa and cousin Andrea had never mentioned it to her until I shared my story. Apparently, even my Aunt Anne had experienced something, but I'm not sure what exactly. Around that time, after my great-grandfather passed away, my great-grandmother slept in the back room. The next morning, she came out and said, "I'll never sleep in that room again. There are ghosts in there." She didn't share what she had experienced until years later, when she told me. I visited her house about 2 years ago, and out of curiosity, I asked her about her experiences. I didn't want to come out and ask directly, so I brought up the subject of the paranormal. I casually mentioned that I didn't like the back room at Grandma's house. She looked at me and said, "You've seen it too, haven't you?" I nodded, and she went on to tell me what happened to her. She said, "I was sleeping, and in the middle of the night, I heard someone go into the bathroom. I thought, why would anyone use that bathroom? It's way back there. The only people in the house were your grandparents. I kept waiting for the toilet to flush, but it never did. Then I heard the cat mewing, really loud. She wouldn't stop. I didn't want to get out of bed, so I let her keep mewing, but she kept getting louder, and I started to feel scared. Then I saw the doorknob turn, and the door opened about 3 feet. The cat came in and jumped on the bed. The next morning, she asked my grandparents if they had let the cat in. Neither of them had. The odd thing was, the door was completely shut, and there were multiple layers of carpet on the floor, making it almost impossible for the door to open that much. If the cat had somehow opened it, it would have only been able to open a crack wide enough to squeeze through. That incident really shook my great-grandmother up. After hearing her story, I've never slept in that room again. We now refer to it as the room in our family. We've never looked into the history of the house, but Grandma has some neighbors who moved into a house nearby. They were newlyweds and took photos of their new home to send to family and friends. In one of the photos, there was a man in a sailor suit standing near a table, with his hand resting on a chair. In another, he was in a different spot. They have these photos hanging in their house now, and they just accept the sailor as part of their family. As for Grandma's ghost, it's never felt negative, and we don't make a big deal about it. We just call it the ghost in Grandma's back room. It's a part of our family's story now, one that we all share, quietly, but with a kind of respect for the mystery it holds. I live in Ashland, Oregon, and until recently, I attended Southern Oregon University. It used to be Southern Oregon State College, but now it has a shiny new name. Like most colleges, Southern has its share of ghost stories. Most of them revolve around a building called Susan Homes, or Susie as we called it. It was built in the 1940s, and people say it's haunted by two spirits: a little boy who drowned in the foundation of the building after a storm, and a young woman who took her own life in the 1960s. I lived in Susie for 2 years, but I never paid much attention to these stories. I'd get a little uneasy every now and then, but I didn't actually see anything. So I just chalked it up to the wild imaginations of my classmates. Most of them were a bit out there anyway, so I wasn't about to believe in ghosts. I guess you could say I was a skeptic. In the winter of 1995, I was living on the 3rd floor of Susie. One night, I had a big paper to write, so I stayed in. I kept my door open, and people were wandering in and out. I saw most of my hallmates throughout the evening, and I knew where everyone was going and what they were doing. If one of them had a visitor, I would have known about it. Around 2 a.m., I needed to use the bathroom. My room was right next to it, and near one of the exits. The other exit was at the other end of the hallway, and it was a long hallway. The building was old, so the doors were solid wood, and they made a loud bang when they closed. I stepped out of my room, and to my surprise, I saw a girl sitting in the middle of the hallway, reading a hardcover book. She looked like she had stepped straight out of the 1960s, like a girl from my mom's high school yearbook. Her style was perfect: lightly back-combed hair, mousy brown and poofy, with a wide red hairband. She wore cat eye glasses, a red cardigan over a white blouse with a Peter Pan collar, a plaid knee-length skirt, white ankle socks, and sturdy black shoes. She was a little chubby, but she didn't seem like she was trying to make a statement with her clothes. It just looked natural, like this was her usual style. I was standing by the bathroom door, surprised to see her, and I said, "Hi." She looked up at me, her face showing a hint of fear. She answered softly, "Hi." At this point, I was stepping into the bathroom, but I wasn't fully in yet. Something about the situation felt off, so I poked my head back out to look at her again. But she was gone. There was nowhere for her to have gone. The hallway was long, and the exits were far down each end. I would have heard one of the heavy doors opening if she had left. She could have maybe slipped into a room, but even then, it would have taken superhuman speed to do so in the time it took for me to look away. I suddenly felt a wave of fear. Something was definitely wrong. I quickly forgot about needing to pee and hurried back to my room. I turned on every light, put on some loud, happy music to drown out the fear, and tried to calm myself. The next morning, I went to every girl on my floor and asked if they had a visitor who looked like the girl I saw. No one had. I'm not sure what to make of it. Maybe she was just a random girl, but I don't think so. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something strange had happened, and I never felt comfortable going to the bathroom in the middle of the night again. Back on October 15, 2004, my girlfriend surprised me with an early birthday gift: a trip to Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Knowing my fascination with the supernatural, she thought it would be a perfect experience. I was excited and came prepared, buying a digital voice recorder and bringing along my digital camera, eager to capture anything unusual. We left around noon, anticipating an adventure. The cemetery was about an hour and a half away, so I wanted to make the most of our time there. We parked across the street in the Forest Preserve lot, as it was the only place to park without risking a ticket. The walk to the cemetery wasn't long, but as we neared the gate, a strange sensation settled over us. The air felt heavier, and a peculiar unease took hold. Something about the place felt wrong. I turned on my recorder as we began to explore, but it started behaving oddly. The timer would jump erratically, skipping seconds. I ignored it and focused on taking pictures. The air was cold, around 42 degrees, and rain began to fall lightly. Despite the weather, we pushed forward, capturing as many photos as we could. but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. More than once, I felt as if someone was breathing down my neck. We were the only ones there, but the sensation of unseen eyes following us was inescapable. After about 20 minutes, we couldn't take it anymore and decided to leave. When we got back to the car, I played back the voice recordings. What I heard was chilling. A low, raspy voice whispered, "Get out." And at one point, when I'd asked my girlfriend to take a picture, another voice taunted us, saying, "Yes, go ahead, take a picture." Hearing those voices made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We didn't see anyone while we were there, but the recordings told a different story. That night, things got stranger. I'm generally very healthy, but out of nowhere, I developed a severe cough and sore throat. By morning, I had a fever of 101 and could barely move. My girlfriend, confused by how suddenly I'd fallen ill, came over with her laptop so we could review the photos. What we found left us both stunned. One picture showed a man standing by a fallen tree, while another captured a full-body apparition of a woman floating and holding what looked like flowers. There were also several images of white mist and faint, disembodied faces. It was undeniable that we captured something beyond explanation. The days that followed brought more misfortune. About a month after our visit, we moved into an apartment together, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. Within 2 months, we were involved in a car accident. Shortly after, my girlfriend lost her job for no apparent reason, and then I lost mine. Despite going on countless interviews, neither of us could find work. Our health continued to decline. We were constantly sick with colds and flu bugs. Even our apartment seemed cursed, with persistent problems that eventually forced us to move out after less than a year. We had no choice but to move in with my parents. Months passed before we finally found jobs again, but by then, our confidence had been shattered. I can't shake the feeling that our visit to Bachelor's Grove had something to do with the string of bad luck that followed. Before that day, we were happy and stable, but everything seemed to spiral downward afterward. I used to dismiss ideas of curses or lingering spirits, but now I'm not so sure. The experience has left me questioning everything I thought I knew. Even now, 2 years later, life hasn't fully returned to normal. I still have the voice recordings and photos, and from time to time, I listen to the whispers and show the images to friends. I've tried submitting them to ghost hunting websites, but oddly, they've never displayed my findings. Perhaps it's better that way. My name is Ruby. I'm 25 years old, and I live in Los Angeles, California. The afterlife has always fascinated me. I've spent hours searching online, reading books, and exploring true stories about the paranormal, hoping to understand more about this mysterious phenomenon. I've had my fair share of experiences, some fleeting and others more profound. But there's one that stands out above the rest, and I'd love to share it with you. 2 years ago, I took over my stepmother's job caring for a sweet elderly woman named Margie. The arrangement was simple. I'd live in her house and look after her for a month. Margie was a joy to be around. She had a charmingly quirky personality, despite her struggles with senile dementia. Every morning, I'd help her out of bed and guide her to the restroom. On our way, she'd often stop, point straight ahead, and say, "Look." I never saw anything, but I'd smile and continue with my task. At the time, that was as strange as things got. At 8 p.m. each night my day ended, and I'd retreat to my room, located near Margie's at the back of the house. It was a cozy space, though the coldest in the home. My first week there was uneventful, but by the second week, things began to shift. One night, I decided to watch a John Lennon documentary on my portable DVD player. I must have dozed off because I distinctly remember sneezing and hearing a clear male voice say, "Bless you." I jolted awake, rewound the DVD, and combed through the footage, but there was no mention of those words. Everyone else in the house was sound asleep. The next morning, I replayed the entire documentary to be sure. Nothing. It left me feeling both puzzled and uneasy. Another night, I was grooming my eyebrows when a phone call interrupted me. I set my tweezers on the bed and stepped away. When I returned, they were gone. I searched everywhere, under the bed, by the closet, shaking out every blanket and pillow. After a frantic 10-minute search, I went to ask Paul, Margie's son and my employer, if he borrowed them. He hadn't. When I returned to my room, I found the tweezers lying in the middle of the bed, as if they'd been mocking my panic. My heart pounded, and I felt a chill in the room. Sleep didn't come easily that night. On the final week of my stay, the most unexplainable event occurred. It was 7 a.m., and I was making my bed as usual. The bed was a queen size with 3 layers of sheets. I tucked in the right side of the second layer and walked around to do the left. To my shock, the left side was already neatly tucked in, as if someone, or something, had done it for me. Frozen in place, I blurted out, "Thank you. Can I help you with something?" But only silence filled the room. That was the last straw. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer and decided to ask Paul about the house's history. Paul admitted that the previous owners had warned him about spirits in the house, describing them as harmless but playful. Despite this, he bought the house and lived there for decades with his wife and children. When his wife passed away in 1999, he came to believe that her spirit lingered, continuing to care for the home and its occupants, just as she always had. He mentioned that the room I stayed in had been his 2 sons' room, a space where her presence was often felt. Hearing this gave me a strange sense of peace. Knowing that the playful energy I'd encountered could have been his wife's spirit was comforting. It felt like a privilege to have experienced her presence, even in such unexpected ways. This experience reaffirmed my belief that I have a connection with the spiritual realm. I've always felt drawn to understanding and even helping spirits, and this time was no different. I've had many other experiences, but this one left an indelible mark on me. For anyone else who's experienced similar activity, I hope this story encourages you not to be afraid. Approach the unknown with curiosity and calm, as I believe our fear can sometimes startle them more than they intend to scare us.